Hey everybody, welcome to Cordial Curiosity, just a casual chat, hangout with some people from the Street Epistemology community, along with Brett Hall. What's up? How's it going?
Yeah. Recovering from the time difference between Sydney and lovely Austin as well, and dealing with the temperature, but it's great to be here, first time ever.
Yes, in Austin, yes. Yeah, and I'm here in Austin. We're on our way to a conference in Palm Springs. Figured we'd stop by here to potentially check out the Tesla Robotaxi launch, but I think that's a little later into the month.
Oh, okay.
But I'll maybe come back at the end of the month to see what happens there. But anyway, how's it going, Doug?
Doing well, keeping busy.
Today we're going to be talking about critical rationalism, which is itself an epistemology. In street epistemology, we like to have critical thinking conversations, and we're currently in the making of a huge self-directed course for teaching people how to do street epistemology. And we finally made it to module 10, evaluating the quality of reasoning, the huge epistemology module for the street epistemology course. And we've had tons of discussions between me, Anthony Moscow, and Ram, we're the three main writers for the course. And I've become enamored with this critical rationalism epistemology since reading The Beginning of Infinity a couple years ago. And it has been very interesting to see how I would potentially change my way of doing street epistemology now that I understand, I think, more about epistemology in general. So, have you heard of critical rationalism, Doug?
I know those two words, but put together in this format, no.
Okay. Would you mind helping yourself learn about critical rationalism by asking Brett questions?
Okay.
First, Brett, just give a quick, couple minute, just brief description of what this is and how it differs from potentially Bayesianism or the other popular epistemologies.
Mm-hmm. I'm increasingly starting to think of epistemology as more like a science than any other domain area. It's not really like part of the humanities or even part of philosophy. It's more like physics. And the reason I say that is because knowledge, as you mentioned in The Beginning of Infinity, is described as that entity which has cosmic significance in being able to shape matter, literally terraform planet Earth, and eventually the solar system, the galaxy, and the rest of the universe. If you want to explain something like the way in which New York looks, you can't just invoke physical forces, geological timescales, chemistry. You have to talk about the knowledge, what people are doing. And so in that sense, in trying to explain the simple physical appearance of stuff, you're in a realm of science. And so epistemology is that domain which talks about all the ways in which not merely do physical structures out there, like cities and other landscapes that have been terraformed over time by the actions of humans, but also what's going on inside our minds. Knowledge becomes this thing that is physical, but independent of the physical substrate. So all of that is to say, it gets at something about knowledge that is quite different to what Bayesianism is talking about, or indeed any other epistemology. Most other epistemologies put epistemology squarely within psychology because it's about belief and degrees of confidence of belief. Now, critical rationalism can account for that, but it's a tiny sliver of the overall importance of what knowledge is. We can talk about what's going on in people's minds, absolutely, and indeed, people are at the center of our concerns in critical rationalism because they are the entities that are generating explanatory knowledge. It's not the only sort of knowledge that exists out there. We can talk about biological knowledge as well. The knowledge that is required for a species to continue over many generations, for example. As I like to say, and this is something from Chiara Mileto, who wrote The Science of Can and Can't, which is all about constructor theory. She talks about how the most resilient structures in the known universe are not things like stars or things like rocks, which you might think these are things that last for the longest over, thinking about the age of the universe. But in fact, what will turn out to last the longest will be knowledge. It is the thing that gets copied over and over again. The example she uses is certain DNA strands inside of certain bacteria have been there literally for 4.5 billion years. And so long as nothing goes wrong, those DNA strands will continue. But that's just the very beginning, because we can imagine the knowledge that we humans have discovered over the last 1,000, 2,000 years and will continue to discover is going to be the information that gets copied again and again and again off into the indefinite future. And it will get copied because it's solving certain problems. The problem of how to survive would be, amongst the most important. There's certain kinds of medical nostrums, certain kinds of ways of making rocketry, certain kinds of ways of keeping ourselves safe in a hostile universe. These are the things that are going to get preserved. So long as we don't go extinct for millions and billions of years, we will outlast the stars. When I say we in the form of our knowledge. And so the way in which this knowledge is constructed is via a method of us guessing. Now, we don't understand exactly how it is that we come up with these guesses. That is the central mystery of what it is to be a person, because we are uniquely able to guess at the nature of the rest of the universe, which is the most astonishing fact that I keep telling Peter about. The most astonishing fact about the universe is that we exist within it, and inside of our minds, over time, develops a model of the rest of the physical universe. And as we learn more, the model inside of our minds comes to more faithfully represent the rest of the universe over time. That self-similarity between us and the rest of the universe is unique so far as we know. Unless there are aliens out there, and there may very well be, what will unite us with the aliens, or indeed with the artificial general intelligences yet to come, is this capacity to model and to explain the rest of the universe. And the way that it's done is that we first generate a guess, and then we subject it to criticism. This is where the street epistemology thing might come in. You want to find out what reasons people have for the guesses that they generate. And that critical aspect is what we call generally reasoning. How can you criticize a claim that a person makes? And if there are no outstanding criticisms, then it is rational to say that you know that particular thing. However, if someone presents a criticism and you've got no way of saying that their criticism is invalid in some way, then you should change your mind. And so that's what the critical part of critical rationalism is all about. It's about criticism, and the ability for a claim to survive criticisms enables it to be called knowledge. And in the area of science, if it survives all known criticisms, where other attempts at criticizing or other attempts at guessing at the nature of reality do not, you're able to label that claim the scientific theory of such and such. So in the case of gravity, what we have at the moment is general relativity, and general relativity is that claim about gravity which has survived all attempts to state that it's wrong. And so this is the way in which critical rationalism, I would say, differs from all those other epistemologies, because at no point did I need, in any of that explanation that I just gave you, talk to you about belief or what's going on with the psychology of people's minds, beyond the fact that the mind is the thing that just generates these guesses.
Great, awesome. A lot there. Anything to unpack or any questions about that, Doug?
It sounds to me it's a little bit like trial and error and see what works.
Yes, that's perfect, and I love it when people just pare back all of the other guff that I often go on with and just bring it back to trial and error. It is exactly trial and error, and I don't think that reduces the importance of the fact that we're taught as little kids that, have a go in mathematics class, have a try. If you make an error, that's how you make progress. The people that teach you that when you're a toddler have it exactly right. Now, it takes a long university education and a PhD to forget that simple fact about reality, and to in fact start talking in terms of, well, we've got to use Bayes' theorem in order to assign credibility to these particular theories in order to figure out which one is actually true or closer to true and all that kind of thing. But yeah, the fact of the matter is it is trial and error. That's right.
Great.
And if it's not like you said, one of the differences is it's not really subject to belief, but subject to criticism. How would that apply to knowledge claims in the realm of politics? Because politics seems to be so much preferential based.
Yeah, and there's potentially this. Deutsch talks about this potential hierarchy of claims, like with mathematics at the top. He goes into that. and then like where there's philosophy might be just mere opinion, and there's science maybe in the middle. But that's what I think of when I hear that question. But go ahead.
Yeah. I'll take a step back, and this is one of the areas, again, we've talked to Peter Bukosian about this one, and I just want to eviscerate belief from the lexicon of epistemology. Look, I think that it's useful to actually talk in terms of belief sometimes in a sort of, if you're not going to take it seriously, if you're just going to use it as a convenient shorthand for something else, because inside of our minds there corresponds in physical reality something called knowledge. There is a pattern of neurons, or whatever it happens to be, however the brain works exactly, that corresponds to something we call knowledge. And knowledge, even if we use it, can turn out to be false. There are many examples of this, but my go-to example is always Newton's law of gravity, which we know is absolutely false. It's been demonstrated to be false by experiment. So no one should believe it. That's the first thing. It's not true. There's no possible way of justifying it. However, it counts as knowledge. It's something that we know. And any physics student that learns Newton's law of gravity will have represented inside of their mind somewhere or other, somehow, this thing called Newton's theory of gravity, and anyone can learn it. And every single thing that you know is represented in your mind. Okay, so that's knowledge. Now, what corresponds in your mind to belief? What I would argue is there is no such physical structure going on inside of your mind that corresponds to belief that stands apart from knowledge. So to believe something and to know something is basically either the same thing or beliefs simply don't exist. Now, what does that mean for the realm of politics? Well, as Reid said there, people have in their mind this idea that there is a hierarchy that David Deutsch talks about. He talks about it in The Fabric of Reality, I think, first, where he says, everyone walks around knowing, they just know that mathematics is the most firm foundational claim to certain truth that we have. That's your bedrock. No one can doubt that 2 + 2 = 4. How could you possibly be wrong about that? Okay, so there's your foundational, fundamental claim, and everyone knows that this is the gold standard, so to speak. Now, slightly further away from absolutely necessary truth is the physical sciences, let's say. So in the physical sciences, physics, chemistry, geology, whatever, we can't know that we've got the absolute truth, unlike with Pythagoras' theorem in mathematics, where we know it's absolutely certainly the case that c² = a² + b². But in, let's say, astronomy, we can know, for example, with some evidence that we're confident about, that the sun is going to last for another 5 to 7 billion years, let's say. We've got evidence for that, we're confident in it, but we're not absolutely certain. We don't have the absolutely certain necessary truth. And then further away from that, we have things in psychology, philosophy, aesthetics, and here it's all just a mere matter of taste. And take it or leave it if you want to be a realist when it comes to morality, or a relativist, or some other, or have this political persuasion, that political persuasion. It's nothing but a matter of taste. Now, everything I've just argued for there is what everyone common sense knows. And it just happens to be completely false. Because all knowledge claims, as I say, are conjectural. They're guesses about reality. This is what critical rationalism and Karl Popper gives us, this idea that there is no such hierarchy. People are guessing their way to the truth. We can never get to the final truth. One of my favorite lines in all of The Fabric of Reality is about mathematics, where David Deutsch says, in such a succinct way as he always does, necessary truth is the subject matter of mathematics. It is not the reward we get for doing mathematics. Now, in those few words contain such a deep truth about the difference between knowledge and subject matter. And so in physics, we have knowledge of particle physics. But the particle physicist, although their job is to try and find the fundamental constituents of matter, none of them should ever expect that upon finding the next quark or lepton, like electrons and so on and so forth, all of these particles that are in the particle zoo, so-called, that their job stops once they find a particular particle. We should expect to have more explanations about why those particles are the way they are. Maybe there are smaller particles still, maybe there are strings, and if there are strings, maybe there's something smaller than strings, and so on. It just keeps on going off into infinity. We have an infinity of progress to make before us. And so when it comes to politics, it's kind of the same thing. And I know people will balk at this, but we know much less about politics than what we know about mathematics or about chemistry. Fair enough. But that's not to say there aren't political truths to be found there, even if we have very little clue about what they are. But we know something. Okay, we should know, and this comes back to knowledge again, that in politics, for example, what we want are political systems that allow for the good political systems, the more true political systems, are the political systems that allow for progress and ever more rapid progress, ever more generation of explanatory knowledge, people to be allowed to flourish. And so therefore we have things like free speech. And so any political system that clamps down on free speech is going to be less true. True by what metric? True by the metric that we want truth to correspond with something like the ability of human beings to flourish, and that would mean their capacity to generate knowledge, their capacity to collaborate, and all that kind of stuff. So it doesn't matter what the domain is. There are truths to be found there, even if we don't know what they are. And that's true in aesthetics and morality and politics as much as it is in mathematics. Even though it's so clean and neat in mathematics and physics to say, okay, you seem to be closer to reality with your theories there. Okay, I have no doubt, I can't think of a doubt, I can't think of a way in which it could be possible that 2 plus 2 could not equal 4, 2 plus 2 must equal 4, but even if we can't say something as strong, so to speak, in politics, doesn't mean there's not something similar that is operating there. And one thing I would hold up is a political system that is going to be tyrannical and prevent people from discussing ideas is going to be false in terms of politics.
Right. Anything to push back on there, Doug?
Oh yeah, lots. First of all, I guess like knowledge is usually defined as justified true belief. How would you define knowledge?
Yeah, it is, yes. And again, that's one of those things where it takes a university education, and in particular Plato, to undo the common sense idea of knowledge.
Like to me, let me see if I can guess. I think you're, from what I'm hearing, you're defining knowledge as a almost like an entity within the universe that we have to discover. It's very similar to truth. Like, is there a difference between knowledge and truth in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
And I would, and I don't mean to irritate anyone, but I am absolutely allergic to definitions, and I will not define knowledge, and I can't define knowledge.
Okay.
I think trying to define knowledge is a fool's errand. In fact, trying to define almost anything is a fool's errand unless you're working in pure mathematics or logic or something like that, and you want to define the successor to the first number 1 as number 2, something like that. But yeah, this problem with defining knowledge is because there could always be something found in the future, some new kind of explanation that won't fit your definition, and then you have to change your definition. So instead of saying that I'm going to give you a definition of the kind that Plato and others give in terms of justified true belief, they say knowledge is justified true belief, and then we have these Gettier examples. I don't know if you're aware of. You heard of the Gettier example? Yeah. And so they're automatically, that's a refutation of the possibility that knowledge is justified true belief. But I happen to prefer the example that I gave before of Newton's law of gravity. I mean, as I say, any physics student, any high school physics student knows Newton's law of gravity. It counts as knowledge. Elon Musk will use Newton's law of gravity to get to Mars. There's no need to use general relativity. Newton's law of gravity works perfectly well. But you can do experiments to show that Newton's law of gravity fails spectacularly in certain situations. So it's no possibility of it being true. Now, we have to start with the point, we have to start with the fact that Newton's law of gravity is knowledge. It just is knowledge. Okay, so given that it is knowledge, but it's false and you can't justify it, and it's not true, and you shouldn't believe it, therefore, what then is knowledge? Well, again, not without defining knowledge, a number of ways at coming at this, which go back to the way I sort of started the conversation, that it's this thing that persists over time. And so I was talking about how Chiara Mileto says that it might outlast every other structure in the universe, knowledge. And so it's something that's resilient. She uses the word resilient. Now, what does resilient mean? Well, it's resilient because it lasts a long time. It lasts a long time because it's getting copied. Why is it getting copied? Well, it's getting copied. It's information that's getting copied. there's lots of information out there, most of which never gets copied. Insofar as this conversation is useful, it will get copied and it will get spread, but if it's not, it might not, and it dies and no one hears it ever again. But resilient information counts as knowledge because it gets copied. It's getting copied because it solves a problem of some sort. So it is the guess, we make lots of guesses every day, but the guess that actually solves the problem in front of us counts as the solution. And so it's the one that's written down rather than being discarded in the waste paper basket. And so I'm talking around the issue because I don't want to tell you this thing is knowledge, but it is this entity that fits all of those categories. Resilient information, information that gets copied, useful information. David Deutsch likes to say information with causal power. So it's information that you've got that can do something. So if you've got information about how the chemistry of rocketry works, that information is going to cause rockets to actually get from one place to another. So yeah, that's how it would come at knowledge without actually giving you a definition. But if you want something succinct, my favorite one is either information with causal power or resilient information. But then of course you'll just ask me, what's information then? And and so we can end up, this is the problem with definitions, is that you end up either in an infinite regress somewhere, or you just have to terminate and say, here's the fact of the matter. So I'm open always to changing my mind on any aspect of what knowledge is.
Yeah, to me, it sounds like the way you're coming at knowledge is it's basically just what is within the universe. Like, well, but let me ask this. If there were no hydrocarbons in the universe, it was just rocks, would there knowledge exist?
No.
Because there's no replicating going on then.
Correct. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it'll be a very boring universe. There wouldn't be anything that would, firstly, need information in order to propagate. So that would be one thing. So as I say, there's sort of these two categories of knowledge. There's the explanatory knowledge, which I think is the most significant, and in the long run of the universe will be the only thing that massively changes the evolution of the universe. But there's also genetic knowledge. And so, DNA contains knowledge, and it counts as knowledge because of the criteria I set up earlier, information that persists, or information that solves a problem, information that tends to get copied. So by all those accounts, DNA counts as a form of knowledge as well, just not explanatory. So it's the less interesting sort of one to talk about. Certainly for street epistemology purposes anyway, you want to talk about a person's explanation of different things, which, just to take a side point, when I was talking to Peter about street epistemology, the idea of the spectrum where you stand at strongly disagree, agree, slightly disagree, whatever. I've always thought, well, you could just have three things. You could have the mat where you say, well, I don't know anything about this claim, and not move. Or you could say, I agree with the claim, or I disagree with the claim, and then you just ask the person, give me your reasons why you're standing on agree, or give me your reasons why you're standing on disagree. It doesn't matter the level of confidence at that point, because then what the street epistemologist would do is evaluate the quality of the explanation being given, rather than asking them about their degree of confidence in it. But that's just my idea about it. Yeah.
One of the things I think is the most useful things that we do in SE, though, is introduce people to the idea that belief is not binary, that there is this spectrum of confidence. And I think just the fact of that existing is sometimes a new concept for the interlocutor.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, because and I think I conceded as much with Peter and Reid as well, that correct, a lot of people don't think about epistemology, or even certainly don't think about epistemology, but they don't think about the reasons they have for holding different beliefs, or the reasons why they have certain ideas that they do, the reasons why they say certain things that they do. They've never really been pressed on the reasons why. They're too busy living their lives, raising their families, going off to work every day, whatever. And so suddenly they're in front of people who are interested in talking about reasons why people have certain ideas. And so, yes, an escape from simply saying, well, I believe it because I believe it. The authority told me, I read it in the book, or the politician said so, or the scientist said so, which is what most people's default, I admit, most people's default epistemology, for want of another word, is just to rest upon an authoritarian appeal to some standard, some gold standard. It might be a religious standard, political standard, scientific standard. And they just say, well, that person says that what I'm saying is true, so therefore that's the reason. Now, if you can get them to say, okay, let's talk about the evidence and what do you think the strength of the evidence is, it's an improvement on that. But I think there's still an improvement beyond that too, that's all.
Yeah, I would definitely want to get to it, evidence and the role of evidence and that versus potentially explanations. Should we, in street epistemology, we usually focus on a single claim and then ask for reasons and then evaluate the reasons. And although I would probably now want to focus alongside a claim, a problem, I'm sure the claim is part of a problem solution set that's probably better worth talking about. And then we can get into explanations and what evidence would refute potentially one set of explanations. That's probably how I'd go about it. But this is my project now, is to figure out, now that we're writing the course, how best should we have these conversations around what's true, what should we think is reliable information to act upon, knowledge, all of that.
One of the key questions that I think street epistemology would be, it might be useful in street epistemology, is simply, what problem are you solving? When someone has a particular claim, because often the evidence happens to be irrelevant. So I think that, okay, let's go the classic controversial one that people talk about, does God exist? Okay, so you have the believer in front of you who is a committed Catholic, theist, Muslim, Jew, whatever, and they say, I absolutely believe in God. God exists, I know God exists, and no one can change my mind, okay? At that point, there's no evidence that anyone could present. And asking them for the evidence, I think, is also pointless. It's what explanation, what good explanation does God serve? Why are you appealing to God? What problem are you solving by having this God thing? And then at that point, you can assess not the evidence they hold forth, because they can't possibly present you with any evidence, unless, of course, they start talking literally about miracles, or they say that the evidence happens to be in the Bible, in which case, at that point, the reasons they have are not good. But many people will say, no, that's not the reason that I believe. I can't give you evidence. This is a faith-based thing. And believing in God, like believing in, for example, UFOs, people see lights in the sky and they say that's definitely aliens visiting from another galaxy, or people who claim that ghosts exist, they've seen them. It's not that the evidence is poor, it's that the explanation is poor, that they're appealing to a supernatural claim. And on that basis alone, regardless of the evidence, you can say that their claim is bankrupt, that this is no good because it doesn't solve any particular problem. But then, of course, you get into, why is the universe there? And in those huge questions, I think it's always the rational thing to say, I don't know, and to admit ignorance, to admit fallibility, rather than say, well, because no one knows, that's a reason for me to, for example, believe in God, or because no one knows what the lights in the sky are, that's a reason for me to believe that aliens are visiting from outer space, and that kind of thing. But we assess, as I say, I'm repeating myself now, assess the quality of the explanation, the extent to which the explanation is a good explanation, a hard to vary explanation, rather than quantity of evidence, which again, amount of evidence, accumulation of evidence, evidence in support of a theory, all of these things do not form a part of critical rationalism. Critical rationalism sees the function of evidence twofold. One, crucially, to decide between theories already given, already guessed, or two, to provide a problem of some sort. And so, the astronomer points a telescope at the sky, gathering evidence in the form of light, sees something they can't explain. That's a problem, and that's what the evidence. So they can keep on accumulating more and more of that evidence, but they still just are left with the problem. This particular twinkling star is doing something that seems to defy the laws of physics. Looking at the star for ever longer is not going to give them the solution. The solution is going to come from within their mind rather than being derived from the evidence from the outside. Or they might very well have two guesses about what this particular twinkling star is, what the reason why it's behaving, and gathering the evidence at that point will decide between one or the other, ruling out one or the other of these particular theories.
Yeah, for a lot of these things, I mean, I have two things I want to introduce, but the thing I'll mention in relation to that is what I notice is when I went back and kind of backstopped my street epistemology with like quote unquote real epistemology and learned about coherentism and foundationalism, I started to realize that a lot of people that I talk to, either religious beliefs or alien beliefs or conspiracy theories in particular, you can really see the influence of a coherentist thought process there, right? They don't believe for one thing. They believe because there's all these little things and they make connections between them. And in their mind, all these things that they hear about are coherent. Now, none of them has a foundation, but the fact that they see multiple lines of evidence, quote unquote evidence, that they can use to support each other, you now have this series of dominoes that are all leaning on each other and nothing's supporting the dominoes, but they're all supporting each other. And I think that forms a lot of people's epistemology.
Yeah, perfect. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, the classic confirmation bias, right? So you've got this ridiculous claim that you believe, you claim to believe. You know, you saw the ghost. The ghost really exists, and now you're just going out into the world and you're searching for things that confirm what you already believe. So you're gathering lots of evidence. You're accumulating evidence. You're doing what many people would regard as the rational thing to do, to accumulate ever more evidence. But the rational thing is not that. The rational thing is to firstly figure out the quality of the explanation. Could there be any other explanation for, you know, the books fell off the shelf? You know, was it the poltergeist, or was it a small tremor? Was it not well balanced? You know, an infinite number of things in certain situations can explain a particular phenomena that you don't know why. So to pick one and then to look for confirming instances is the sine qua non, the perfect example of irrational ways of thinking. Yeah.
I'm still not clear how this is any different than what street epistemology does, or is it different?
Well, it takes a
if we take a specific example and walk through the two different ways, like let's take the God belief. Someone approaches me and says, I believe in God. And let's say, you know, cut to the chase, no rapport building, whatever. And I say, why do you believe that? They give me an answer. And then I do the outsider test for faith and say, if so-and-so believes for this reason, would that mean this God is true? No. Then why does it mean in your case? And then they explain, they give me a different reason. And how is your method different than that?
Can I give a guess because of what I've heard? I want to see if I've learned from you, because you said, what problem is this solving? And that seems meaningful to me. So a lot of the time, not a lot of the time, maybe half the time, instead of saying, why do you believe that? My first question to someone will be, why is this meaningful for you? Right. And that might get to that question of what gap are they using to fill that with, or what? So I don't know if that's what you meant, but I'll try that out for size.
It is, and again, this takes an entire mental or psychological shift, really. So it's different because I simply would never ask someone, do you believe in God? Because it's not about belief. Epistemology is not about belief. And so if someone says to me, I believe in God, I would say something like, I would want to turn it around to knowledge. Now, here's where the mental shift comes in. So I would immediately say, how do you know that God exists? Now, they might very well say, I don't know that God exists. I just believe that God exists. And then I would say, okay, let's discuss what you mean by know, and let's discuss what we mean by belief. Because to me, well, not just to me, this is Popper, this is Deutsch, and in fact, this is the way that people use the word. When you say, I know X, okay, I know God exists, what you are not claiming is that I have 100% certainty that X obtains. In fact, what you mean quite often is, I'm not really sure. Okay, if I say, I know that I left my keys on the kitchen table. What I'm not saying is, I'm absolutely certain I could not possibly be wrong about this particular claim. Okay, it's a guess. It's my best guess is to know. And so in the realm of when we're talking about God, if I say to them, how do you know that God exists? They might say, well, I don't know God exists. Okay, well, in that case, it's kind of irrelevant at that point, any other
what
account.
What if they do say they know God exists?
Yeah, then I would ask, what is your explanation? because to know something is to say that you must have an explanation of some sort. It doesn't mean the explanation has to be perfect or final or anything like that, but it must be some kind of explanation. And then we can just immediately get into talking about their reasons for this belief in God, this so-called belief in God, because the account they give will tell you, and it'll probably reveal to them, if they're allowed to unpack it over time, whether or not they really should be devoting their entire life to worshipping this entity that they say they know exists. Because if you can reveal to them that in fact their reasons for claiming to have this knowledge are in fact not solid, because if you really believe in God, many people who believe in God are devoting rather a lot of mental energy to it. They might be going to church on the weekends, they might be invoking God, organizing their life, their morality, all around this sort of thing. So they want to know that their reasons for belief are, well, reasons for knowing that this entity that is keeping them under perpetual surveillance at all times is really out there. And so people will reveal themselves by the account that they give. And in my experience anyway, the account that they give often comes back to a little more than, well, explain reality, explain everything. And yeah, and so it's like, there are two sorts of people in the world. There are people who are comfortable with uncertainty, comfortable with not knowing, comfortable with saying, I don't know why the entire universe is here. I can't explain all of these mysteries. And there are those people who say, I'm uncomfortable with that situation. And so I'm going to insert whatever it happens to be into the gap. And so the famous God of the Gaps argument starts there. But the God of the Gaps argument works for, ghosts and UFOs and everything else. It's like, I'm uncomfortable with the uncertainty, and so I'm going to make it certain by inventing a thing and shoehorning it into there. But again, as you notice, at no point am I really appealing to someone's strength of belief and the strength of their belief in God. At no point, of course, whether they say they slightly believe in God, do believe in God, or strongly believe in God, makes no difference to the quality of the explanation. It's irrelevant to how good, and you would assess the quality of their explanation, of course.
I've been thinking lately, I'm not convinced that the people's thought process or the reasons that they have are even the point. And I'll explain what I mean. I've been thinking a lot more in terms of neuroplasticity and the fact that people who are indoctrinated, and I'm not a neurobiologist, right? I read How Minds Change. I've read a few other things. I know about growth mindset. People who have been indoctrinated have these very strong neural pathways, which don't allow them to think about any things in any way. Like, I think they literally cannot examine those beliefs. But I believe that when we make people work by doing street epistemology, like not by telling them things, we tell them things, it doesn't do anything. But if we make them think, it's going to create a new neural connection. And if that neural connection keeps getting reinforced, then eventually they're going to develop the ability to think in that way. And that's part of why I think that people don't typically change their mind during a street epistemology conversation, but you do get those moments of aporia where you just kind of stop them. And I think, I don't know what's going on in their brain at the moment, but in my imagination, it's like, okay, they just made a new neural connection there, or they just broke an old neural connection. And so I think that by doing repeated SE conversations with people, we're actually changing their brains physically to the point where we're making it possible that at some point in the future, they can make that mental leap and start to think more rationally. This is my crackpot theory, but it's the way I've been approaching SE lately.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes from the great Sam Harris. Sam Harris said once that seeing someone change their mind in real time is like witnessing a supernova blast. It's extremely rare. You're very rarely going to see it in front of you. But yes, you're right. I couldn't agree with you more that in having street epistemology conversations with people, like in having any discussion with a person, they might not change their mind there. They might very well push back extremely strongly with you, but they will go away and they will think about it. And then at that point, they will change their mind. Now, it was interesting the way you talked about that. I just want to push you on that. At the one point you said that their neural pathways are such that they're physically incapable of doing a particular thing. But then you sort of later on you said, but if they have conversations, then your neural pathways would change. So you're not actually claiming that for any given individual human being that they're physically, literally incapable of changing their mind. You just mean that at that particular moment in time.
At that particular moment in time,
yes,
it's like literally they have a switchboard in my head, and the paths the electrical signals will go down certain paths, and there are other paths that are unavailable. Again,
But
not a
eventually-
neurobiologist. I have a very superficial understanding of neuroplasticity, and but it seems like a very powerful concept.
Yeah, look, that works within the framework that I normally talk about. I think it's always the wrong level of analysis to go down talking about neurobiology, neurons, and that kind of thing when you're talking at a higher level, because as Reid would know, we often talk about the universality of the human mind, which is a computational way of looking at brains and minds, where you say the brain is the physical hardware and the mind is the software that's running on it, and that software is actually infinite in its elasticity. And this again goes back to the very beginning of the conversation, where I'm talking about this fundamental, amazing feature of the mind, where it can come to resemble the rest of the physical universe. And so it doesn't matter what the physical phenomena is out there. Literally anything at all, any process that's out there that's happening, our minds can come to represent it in some way, come to explain it, come to model it, and there's no limit to our capacity to do that, which means that all other such entities, whether they be aliens or AGI, will also have this capacity. And it doesn't matter. This is why I don't believe in, for example, see, this is where the common sense use of the word belief is actually, you can't completely get rid of it. But I don't believe in the idea of superintelligence. A lot of people are worried about superintelligence at the moment. There's a lot of doomerism going on about these entities that we might invent or will accidentally arise out of ChatGPT or some future version of ChatGPT, and will be able to outthink us and then take over the world like the Terminator scenario. But I think that's literally impossible, precisely because there's nothing beyond universality, and we already have universality. Things might be able to think faster or have more memory, but they won't be able to qualitatively think of things that we can't think of, because we can already think of anything.
Yeah, and this is a categorical difference in kind between humans and the rest of the animal kingdom. I know, Doug, you have this chart in your mind of there's chimpanzees and humans and there's dolphins below that, but there is this physical, this trait of the ability to create explanatory knowledge is what makes humans very, very special, and I think categorically different.
Yeah, black and white. It's the 0 to 1 thing. It's the difference between finite and infinite. However you want to describe this black and white difference. You could rank order all other animals in the animal kingdom. Obviously a bacteria is not learning anything. It's not going to do anything. It does seem to be the case that insects are capable of a bit more than what bacteria are, and then the mouse is capable of a bit more than the insect, and then the dog and the chimpanzee, are able to do a wider repertoire of things. Learn, indeed. Dog, you can teach an old dog new tricks. You can teach dogs tricks. You can teach chimpanzees basic language and that kind of thing. So there can be some sort of continuum, some sort of curve of increased cognitive capacity with those animals. But none of those animals will be able to give you an explicit explanation of anything at all. Once an entity can do that, then they've achieved escape velocity in a sense, and they're able to, again, model the rest of physical reality. Now, I've got cats. My cat will have an interesting working model of the inside of my house. It knows where stuff is, but it's not going to be able to explain, the action of the sun. But as soon as you can explain what fusion reactions are and why the sun shines, again, you've achieved escape velocity. You are a person. And so this is why in David Deutsch's nomenclature, the word person takes on a quite precise meaning, rather than, I think one of his great contributions, lesser known, aside from, discovering quantum computation and all of the other things that he explains in the beginning of Infinity, I think his explanation of what a person is, namely a universal explainer, is a huge contribution to philosophy. People used to wonder about, is the difference between people and all other creatures their capacity to suffer or to have morality, to organize themselves into social groups, to do science. Okay, it is true that that's what people can do, and that is the way in which they're different to other animals. But the unifying thing is their capacity to generate explanatory knowledge. It subsumes all of those other things, and it is that thing which is different to all the other animals. And once you have that universal capacity, even if you're made of silicon, so one day we should have AGI, and we'll be talking to Carlos, who's an expert in AGI and comes from the Popperian perspective. There are a lot of people claiming to work on AGI at the moment, but they're almost all coming from this perspective that AGI is just an incremental step on the hierarchy from the artificial intelligence we've already got. But as I say, the word intelligence has been so denuded in the tech community of the original meaning that it had, that it's very difficult to have these conversations because people are already in a mindset that those systems that we've got, like ChatGPT, they are intelligent in some way. They are solving problems. They are creative and all that kind of thing. And so it's simply because we've started to use that word language. If we just stuck with, look, here's a computer that's doing stuff, here's a search engine that's able to do better than what Google can, then it would have solved all of these problems. But we have a problem with nomenclature now. So yeah, that's my spiel. That's my rant on artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence, and super intelligence. I think there's basically two sorts: unintelligent stuff or non-people, and intelligent stuff or people. Problem solvers, problem havers, and things that don't have problems.
What would you do differently than Peter and Reed if you were to go out and talk to people? Like, you know how they do that street epistemology thing? I got the sense earlier that you would do away with the mats.
I wouldn't do away with the mats. I'd do away with some of the mats.
Which
just
mats?
Think that, so my partner actually was also part of the street epistemology, and I think his feedback was that if you've got a large group of people doing street epistemology, I don't know, but my experience was when doing it myself, and our experience was that if you move to slightly agree or slightly disagree, you can hide. And generally the people that are talked to are the people who go to strongly in either direction. But as I say, the reason I would do away with almost all the mats and keep three, I would keep a mat in the middle for if you have a claim like, do you think God exists? Okay, the mat in the middle would be don't know, so you don't have an opinion either way. Or there would be, I think they do, agree or disagree. Just agree or disagree, that's all you need. So you need the three mats of don't know, agree with the claim, disagree with the claim. And then you just interrogate the people on agree and disagree as to their reasons why, as to the explanation they have for standing where they do. Because although I understand that Peter likes to push people, get them moving from agree to slightly, or to have them move around. But I think it would be far more useful just to have a person move from agree to disagree. If you move from, and I know that Peter enjoys doing this, moving from strongly agree to only slightly agree, and then he sort of says that, like that's progress. But really I want to know, okay, what about your explanation has fundamentally changed, causing you to shift mats? Because you still ostensibly agree with the claim, whether you agree with it, you slightly agree with it, or you just agree. I think there's three levels, is that right? Strongly agree and slightly.
Agree strongly.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have absolutely.
Yes. I just want to know, if you either have an explanation, you either know something or you don't know something, is my thought about epistemology in general. And quite often when a person says that they slightly agree with something or slightly disagree with something, I think in almost all cases, those people in fact won't know. They won't have an explanation. They've just got a general wishy-washy feeling. But to me, that is not a good reason. That is saying, I don't know, I don't have an explanation, but I'm just going with an intuition. Now, it's not to say that intuitions aren't important and they can be useful at times and whatever else, but when you're in street epistemology, I think that the whole point is you want to be giving an account of yourself that is somewhat more substantive than I feel this particular way. I have I have an intuition, because that's not, it's not really informative. It's not an interesting conversation. If someone just holds up, says, I believe in God. Why do you believe in God? I just feel he exists. Okay, well, the conversation kind of stops there. I want to know the explanation. And if you get into the explanation, there's lots of interesting discussions you can have about, people believing in God. They can say the fine tuning of the physical constants. That's an interesting one. Like, why does the value for the strength of gravity or the charge on an electron or the so-called fine structure constant, the speed of light, all of these things are so-called finely tuned. If you changed any of the values, then the universe would cease to be and possibly be completely hostile to life.
Hey, Brad, can I interrupt here?
Yeah, sure.
You just said a minute ago, you either know something or you don't. Now I have a car. I'm inside my house. It's on the street. Do I know it? Can I say I know my car's outside?
Yes, because again, as I say,
What if it
I don't
was
think,
stolen in the 2 minutes that we've been talking?
yes. So as I say, to know something does not mean that you know it's certainly true. I do not think I know is
Okay, I get
equal
that,
to
but do
I
you
am
get
certain
that? What I'm getting at is I know the crime rates here in my neighborhood. I know there's probably a 0.03% chance that it's going to be stolen in any given day, which is very low. Would you still say, given that chance, I know that it's there?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
It doesn't
Now,
mean
what if I live in a neighborhood where it's 50% chance of it being stolen? Would you say I know it now?
Either you have an explanation that the car is outside, or you don't have an explanation. Now, if it's not to say that you need to be psychic or anything like that. It's just that if you've got absolutely no reason to think your car has just been stolen, no matter the crime rates, then you can say that I know my car is outside. That's where I parked it. That's where I last saw it. I've got no reason to think that it might have been
But I
stolen.
also
That's not
know
to
the
say
crime rates.
it might very well have been stolen. As I say to you, you can know things that are completely false. That doesn't change the fact that you know them. As I say, I know Newton's law of gravity. I also simultaneously know it's completely false, that it's wrong, that I'm wrong to think that it's true. Now,
So what I'm getting at, Brett, is that these mats represent those crime rates. It's basically, if let's say the crime rate is 0.03%, then you would go to the strongly agree. But let's say the crime rate's 10%, then you go agree, but not strongly. Like, this is why there's a great gradation there.
I understand the reason for it. I just don't think that it would change my claim at all. As you say, if it is the case that we're talking about the good example that you bring up, it's like your car's outside, okay? So you're living in a place where the crime rate is exceedingly low, and you say, I know my car is outside. You want to say that I strongly agree with the claim that my car is outside. I know my car is outside with 99% confidence. But if the crime rate, on the other hand, is very, very high, there's a 50% chance of so-called, there's half of the cars in your town get stolen every single day. And so then would you say I'm less confident or something like that? Well, the only thing you can do is to either say, you know the car is outside, or you don't know the car is outside. Like, but if you bring it into the realm of knowledge, outside of belief, then there is no spectrum. You know a thing, you have
What
an
I'm saying is,
explanation, or you
then
don't.
your definition of knowledge becomes less practically valuable, because 50% crime rate for a car being stolen is a bad example. It's more like 25%. I lean that my car is there outside right now. I know my car is outside. I am 75% confident, but I am aware the explanation of the crime rates that there's a 25% chance that my car is gone. So that's more valuable to me than just saying you either know it or you don't.
Well, again, in the street epistemology case, what you want is to try and elicit from a person the explanation for why they're making the claim they do. So if you say to me that you are less confident your car is still outside, I would say to you, why? And you would give me this good account. You would say,
right,
well, the crime rates in this area are very, very high. So you don't need to go down the road of talking about believing the car is outside, confident the car is outside. You just tell me about these crime rates. You say, oh, look, I know the car's outside. That's where I parked it. I left it out there. But by the way, Brett, the crime rate in this area is very, very high. So it's not like I'd be surprised if I walked outside and saw
these
the car
terms,
wasn't there, for
belief and
example.
confidence, are just basically synonyms for things like probabilities.
I agree. Yes, they can be useful fictions, just the same way that Newton's law of gravity is. Useful fictions. It's just that if you want to seriously talk, I'm not trying to denigrate the whole project here. I think it's so important. But if you want to take seriously what epistemology is about, that it's a study of knowledge, that knowledge is this thing with certain physical properties, that it's information that causes physical things to happen in the world, then there is no place for belief there. Now, again, this is not to say that what's happening in street epistemology isn't useful. It very much is, because as we already conceded early on, it's an escape from these authoritarian ways of appealing to what exists, or people's otherwise bad ideas of never even thinking about why they make the claims that they do. So Yeah, I would still say it's just a personal preference that if you're in a situation where, again, that simple example is the car still outside, I would just say I know the car's outside. Now, at what point would I say I don't know the car's outside? If the crime rate, I suppose, is more than half of cars in this particular area get stolen over the course of a day, and I waited a full 24 hours, then I would expect to say, I know my car's no longer outside because just as a matter of probability, it's going to get stolen, something like that.
Maybe a more useful metaphor for those of us who live in communities, in households of people, if you have shared ownership of a car and there's multiple people who use it, right? It's like, well, I know I was using it this morning and I parked it outside, but then there's 4 other people who use the car and I don't know where they all are right now.
Yeah, I tend to use the word guess as well. It's like, I guess it is. I guess it's outside. I'm not sure. I'm never sure. I don't know. I don't know either way. You can, that's the other thing, I guess. I don't know if the car's outside because the crime rate is so high, it may very well have got stolen, yeah. But again, it comes down to the more interesting thing here is the reasons why people are saying certain things. And on that, we all agree that that's really where the interesting conversation comes in, rather than focusing on whether people are hopeful a thing is true, fearful a thing is true, confident a thing is true, certain a thing is true. All of that is just it's sort of like preamble to getting to the meat of the matter. You know, if someone's just saying, I'm highly confident in this, I strongly agree, it's like, okay, we've gotten past that hurdle. But now the really interesting conversation is, and we all agree with this, why?
Right. I'm thinking classically in SE, how I used to do it a few years ago, I would have an actual physical scale where I would try to weigh up evidence. And I would try to think, okay, if it's weighing as much this way, and it's pointing to potentially a certain degree on the confidence scale, that should match a kind of probability that you should be able to rationally justify that probability. And if the stakes are high enough, you should better have a high probability to match your high credence level to be able to rationally act. That's how I thought of it. But
Well,
I'm just like,
hopefully you've discarded that. Hopefully you've discarded any idea that people are linear.
yeah, that's just the goal. That's how we should ideally. That's how I thought we should act. You know, in the Bayesian way.
It's still the prevailing view. I mean, in certain rationalist community, I think what do they call themselves? The less wrong community, and there's a whole bunch of people like this. Certainly, all of the Silicon Valley tech people talk in this way. They talk in terms of trying to make precise the confidence that you have in particular guesses. So, taking the street epistemology sort of grayscale, they take that seriously. Then they then go a step further to say not merely does strongly agree and strongly disagree and slightly and all that correspond to something in reality, but we can in fact put precise numbers on these things as well. And so your strongly agree in their nomenclature, in the Bayesian nomenclature, would be, you know, I'm 90+% sure. And the reason I'm 90+% sure is because I can literally do a calculation of some kind by gathering evidence and update my priors, they say. And they talk in these terms, and to anyone unfamiliar with epistemology who's coming at it for the first time, that sounds mathematically precise. It seems to be turning epistemology, like I want to turn epistemology into a branch of physics because I think it will ultimately be about the kind of explanations that are possible to make and impossible to make, which takes us into constructor theory, and so it may very well be a part of science. But people coming from the Bayesian side of things are trying to say that epistemology is really a branch of mathematics, that you take probability seriously and can assign probabilities to the degree of confidence you have and the particular claims that you make. Now, of course, the whole problem with that is that in fact, even probability is not actually true. It also is nothing but a useful fiction, because every time you would use probability, even in places where seemingly it's uncontroversial, like a casino or flipping a coin, okay, let's take the flipping a coin example, it's supposed to be, by definition, 50-50 heads, tails. But the truth of the matter is it's not 50-50 for any coin, because coins obey not the probability calculus, they obey the laws of physics, in fact, the laws of quantum physics, which in fact are not probabilistic. No coin is perfect. Ideal coins in the abstract, you can just talk in the abstract, and you can possibly program a computer which has an ideal, a perfectly mathematically precise ideal coin, which will in fact land 50% heads, 50% tails. But anyone could do the experiment for themselves. Flip a coin 100 times. You will very unlikely get 50 heads and 50 tails. You get approximately that, but that's the point. If you're one of these people like me who thinks that if probability was true, then you would, in some long run sense, get 50-50. Now, asymptotically close to 50-50 is not 50-50, but that's a whole other story, which is anyone who's interested in this can just look up David Deutsch Probability Physics, where he goes through this wonderful lecture, which is very poorly subscribed. It's just like a series of slides, and he's talking to the slides, talking about exactly what I've mentioned there, which is that despite what people say about probability as it being this fundamental thing that we all should rely on and use as rational people to talk about in terms of how probable something is and how confident something is, in fact, it's all just a useful fiction. And if you're interested in the fundamental best explanations we have of reality, probability in fact is not part of that. Physics is part of that. Epistemology is part of that, but neither of those need Bayesianism or assigning of numbers to credences and so on.
Yes, and another big part of how I used to think, I would follow this phrase that is very popular, that we should be evidence-based. And now I'm thinking evidence is important, although it's not something that should be what we base, at the bottom, fundamentally, what we should act upon, or what we should think is the case out there is as part of reality. Ideally, we should be focusing more on explanations, and many people will just jump to a positivist, piece of evidence to support potentially the truth of a claim. But now I'm always trying to think, where does this claim fit within an explanation, and is that explanation good? Not, is this a high quality, reliable piece of evidence for me to just use as a thing to justify a claim?
Yeah, and evidence is relevant in the domain of science mainly, or history and places like that, but not everywhere. I mean, for example, the claim that evidence should form part of your explanation, what is the evidence for that claim? So there's always an explanation that we want to talk about it across all domains. That's the universal thing. Appeals to evidence are not universal. They're sort of partitioned off, if you like, in the areas of science, which is extremely broad, but I would also include history in that. We would talk about the evidence when it comes to people who make historic claims. But in mathematics, unless you have a really, really broad definition or understanding of what evidence is, there is no evidence that you can bring forth that c squared equals a squared plus b squared, all right angled triangles obey Pythagoras' theorem. You don't start drawing triangles and say, this one obeys Pythagoras' theorem, this one, and you accumulate all these triangles and say, therefore c squared equals a. No, in fact, c squared equals a squared plus b squared is prior to, like all mathematics, it's prior to any evidence. And we then go out into the physical world, and we, of course, necessarily everything is required to obey what's going on in mathematics. Morality is another one, and this is, I find this an interesting case in point, because the Marxists, socialists, the communists will say, well, we've never tried real communism. Okay, so they're looking for an evidentiary claim. They want more evidence. The evidence so far put forth is unconvincing to the committed communist. And so at that point, you can take it out of the realm of evidence. It's not about evidence. Yes, it's true that every time we tend in the direction of communism, societies fall to ruin. We can point to any number. North Korea right now, the Soviet Union, any other now extinct communist nation. But in fact, that's not the argument against communism. The argument against communism doesn't rest upon the evidence. It shouldn't be an appeal to evidence. It should be an appeal to morality. It should be an appeal to, do these societies allow for the flourishing of people? Do they allow for rapid knowledge production, for individuals to creatively explore their own problems? Or is it a recipe for a society where people are required to obey the government or to obey the state, to give up wealth creation. Wealth is another part of this entire worldview, where it's the repertoire of physical transformations you're capable of enacting, and as soon as you start to have large amounts of laws or a pool of money where everyone has to solve the same problem at the same time, that's a recipe for disaster. And so none of this requires appeals to evidence, like look at this particular thing, look at this physical thing as well. So there's a lot of interesting claims, in fact possibly the majority, where evidence is not particularly relevant. You can talk about, as I say, with the communism thing, you can point at North Korea and go, look, that's failed. Look at South Korea. Either side of the demilitarized zone and what is still technically a war, you can see on one side, if you tend in the direction of capitalism, you get a flourishing and reasonably happy people and lots of wealth. And on the other side, you have destitution, poverty, and tyranny. So that's an evidentiary claim, but I think there's something prior to that, as I say, which has nothing to do with the evidence, but everything to do with the morality of the situation and the nature of personhood, in fact.
But even that is like very subjective, right? Like someone could have the goal of destruction. And so therefore the right answer to what type of government to have would be, let's say, some type of dictatorship, communism, or whatever.
Yes, but
that would be the correct. That'd be the knowledge-based correct answer based on their goal.
Yes. But their goal is wrong in a technical sense. Their goal is wrong because it's evil, and of course, I'm a realist.
This is interesting. It's wrong. Yeah. Okay, why is it wrong?
Because I think I'm a realist, not a relativist, when it comes to morality, and so I think that there's a coherence to all of our knowledge. So, in a sense, there's physics, science, morality, epistemology, politics. They all sort of cohere in a way, and so there's no one preferred place to begin. But let's pick personhood. Okay, so a person is, as I say, this entity that creates explanatory knowledge. A person is something that has problems. A person wants to solve their problems by creating explanatory knowledge. Okay, so if we take that as reality, then it is good and true to have societies set up in such a way that allow for the maximal flourishing of that. So anyone who comes along and says, hey, I disagree with that. I think that society should be destitute. I think that there should be communism because I want people to be controlled. I do not want people to flourish. I want people to be, sat inside of a box and to do what they're told. I would not simply say that's evil. I would say it's wrong. It's false. That kind of thing is just incorrect. It's as incorrect to say that. It's as incorrect to say that a person should be put in a box and obey the government as it is to say that 2 + 2 = 5, or that electrons are positively charged particles, or the Earth is
Let me challenge you on that. Why exactly is it wrong and incorrect?
Because of what a person is. A person is a knowledge creator, a problem solver. And so the denial of that would be to say they must obey the state at all times. They shouldn't have freedom. They shouldn't be allowed to keep the wealth they generate. Opposite
position, say, but your explanation is flawed because people are fallible, they're stupid, and they're evil. So we ought to destroy them. That's my explanation. Good. I'm right, you're wrong.
Yeah.
And I would say you're fundamentally being relativist because you're taking an anthropocentric view. And how can you justify an anthropocentric view? Right? You should remove your bias. Because you're a human, you should remove your bias of humanhood and then look from a more globalist view.
So this reminds me of Sam Harris when he talked about Al-Qaeda. And he said, we should no more want to think that Al-Qaeda are correct when it comes to morality, that they're right in some sense, that it's morally okay for them to beat their women, to keep their children illiterate and so on and so forth. We should no more think that they have a valid claim to morality than that they have a valid claim to physics. That if they think that the universe is only 5,000 years old, that we should all go, oh, well, okay, well, I'm a good cultural relativist, so if the Taliban or if Al-Qaeda or if some other fundamentalist group thinks this about science, who are we to judge them? Who are we to say they're wrong in some objective sense? Well, who are we not to say that they're wrong? Of course they're wrong when it comes to
Well,
science.
but they're wrong because of the goal. That's the point I was making. If the goal is flourishing, human flourishing, then yes, your explanation is right. But what if the goal is destruction? Then my explanation is right.
Yeah, they can have the goal. What I'm saying, I'm going a little bit deeper, I'm saying the goal itself is wrong. Now, why is the goal wrong? Because I'm not a relativist. Now, you can say, anyone can come forth and say, my goal is the destruction of humankind. In the same way that they can come forth and say, 2 + 2 = 5. Now, in both cases, I can give an argument as to why they're actually objectively wrong. I know that when it comes to morality, this is far more controversial than saying that you shouldn't be a relativist when it comes to physics or mathematics. But I just don't see a distinction. I think that these are all claims to knowledge. Some things we know and people take as being foundational truths that can't be questioned more than others. People will say there's no possible way that you can even question 2 + 2 = 4. But you can question people should be allowed to flourish, people should be allowed to keep the wealth they create. But being a committed realist, non-relativist, I don't agree with that because I think that all knowledge is a coherent whole. We can come to understand something about all domains, mathematics, science, philosophy, and morality. There's an objectivity to morality. Well, that's an interesting point of discussion. Do you guys think that that morality is, here's what I think morality is, and then I'll put it over to you. Morality is solving the problem of what we should do next. What should we do next? So do you think that morality is just anything goes, that it depends upon your culture or depends upon your brain structure, or what is morality?
I mean, if you're a determinist, and I think I have come to the determinist point of view, like morality is just something that our brains happen to do as a part of what started when the universe started. I mean, that's maybe a bleak way to take a look at it, but if you look at it from the point of view of us having free will, then morality to me seems like it's an evolutionary mechanism to protect my genes. And I look at it as a series of concentric circles where there's myself, and then there's my family and my larger tribe, and then going out until there's people who I care less about. So that's kind of how I view it. Doug?
I'm actually in agreement with, I don't know your name.
Nick.
I would say we're pre-programmed to have these preferences that most of the time converge amongst cultures, like, don't chop off the head of every baby that's born, otherwise we will go extinct. I think that's pre-programmed in us. I'm a naturalist, but I think there's also a subset of morality that is very just preference, what I desire, what I think based on how I was raised, what is good and what is bad. And you see this often in politics.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think there can be it's like aesthetics as well. There can be subjective aspects to morality as there are subjective aspects to beauty. What certain people find beautiful is going to be different to what someone else finds beautiful. But this is not to change the fact that there are still objective truths to be known, even if we don't know them. So independent of, for example, because as I say, this goes back to the universality of the human mind, in theory, in some distant future, our minds, we would hope, can be downloaded onto something more robust than the human brain. People want to be able to escape these meat bags that we're in. Maybe in the distant future we can be cyborg type things that look like humans, but we're all made of titanium alloy or something like that, and we so effectively live forever. Now, if that situation, that science fiction at the moment situation obtains, now there's nothing in physics, by the way, that rules this out. In fact, everything in physics says that not only is this possible, but if we keep on making progress, it will happen at some point. Why would we want to remain inside of these bodies which are subject to disease, to cancer, to degradation, to being hit by a bus, if we could have something that's far more robust? Now, if that happens and our minds can be downloaded onto this thing, at that point, we won't be made of genes because we won't have any. We won't have any DNA. And if we have children, again, we won't have these instinctual impulses. Now, I don't know what the situation will be in some distant future like that, but certainly artificial general intelligence, for example, won't have genes, but it will have a mind and it will be able to explain things. And it will need to have a morality. And what kind of morality will it have? The one in which it's raised. The culture in which it's raised will shape its initial morality. But morality, as I say, the fundamental question always before us is, what should we do next? And I think there are right and wrong answers to that. The wrong answers are the ones that lead towards, in general, suffering, or to some sort of shutting down of our capacity to solve our problems, the slowing down or the retardation of our capacity to make accelerated progress and to understand the world more. We should want to understand the world more. And I think that is an objective claim about reality, which it's good to pursue. And I'm just as happy, as I say, to say that someone who comes to me and says 2 + 2 = 5 is just as wrong as the person who says, if the little girl learns to read, then she should have acid thrown in her face, as, you know, the Taliban says, for example. I think those two things are equally wrong, not for the same reasons, but for the similar reason there are moral truths out there independent of what anyone thinks about them. So even if a whole group of people says, no, we think that the society should be organized under a communist dictatorship or whatever, I think they're just objectively wrong.
So you think if all human sentient life in the universe died, there would still be moral truth?
No, there's because there would be nothing that should happen. There's no open-ended nature of.
So when you say there's objective moral truth, what do you mean then?
Well, the moral truths are truths about what should be done, what people should do. So absent people, then there's nothing that people should do. So in what sense do they exist? Well, it's almost like saying, in what sense do historic truths exist? Well, they exist, but if we took away all people, there wouldn't be a history. Well, there would be no history.
Okay, so there's a moral truth out there if humans exist. How do you know what it is?
In the same way that you learn truths about science, you never learn the final truth. Yeah, this goes back to the distinction between truth and knowledge. So,
right, okay, so that means it's like an asymptote. Truth is here on the top, like on a graph, and it's an asymptote, right? You're approaching it.
That's good. I like that, except that, yes, we approach it, but I don't think that, yes.
We're always at the beginning.
We're always at the beginning as well. That's what I'm trying to get at. Yeah, it's like.
Okay, if we're always at the beginning, how can you make a dogmatic claim that something is right or wrong then?
Never dogmatic.
Never dogmatic, yeah. But you can always tell that you're.
Well, you're dogmatic about the putting acid on the child's face.
Or if you're, before I get to that, we will always be at the beginning of infinity, but we won't always be an equal distance from zero, from knowing nothing, from being utterly ignorant and knowing absolutely nothing. Again, the physics example is Aristotle knew something about gravity that was better than the caveman. Okay, so that was, and then Newton came along and he learned something about gravity that was better than Aristotle. And then Einstein came along and he learned something about gravity. So we're moving away from complete ignorance without ever getting, if you like, very close to the truth. We're always at the beginning. There's always going to be more to learn and whatever. So if you could say, oh, you're very dogmatic, Brett, about saying that general relativity is a good account of gravity. Well, I will say it's a good account of gravity. I'm not saying it's the truth about gravity. It contains some truth. It also contains a whole bunch of misconception. In the same way, throwing acid into the girl's face to say that that's wrong is like saying some random person's guess about the nature of gravity outside is going to be wrong when set against Einstein's theory of general relativity. So moral claims aren't, when I say that something is good morally, this is the good thing to do, this is the right thing to do, I'm not saying this is the final, utter, ultimate truth and that I'm going to be committed to it and say that there's no possibility of me being wrong, but that's not to say I wouldn't defend with my life that particular claim. For example, we went to war. One reason you go to war is because you want to defend with your life things like free speech, the capacity for children not to suffer, wealth generation, all that sort of stuff would be worth fighting for. Now, you could call that dogmatic. I would just call it being committed to good explanations and indeed committed to the truth without even knowing you have the final truth in hand.
Yeah, and I would say that this is where the idea of confidence scales go. Like we can be more confident that throwing acid on a child's face for learning to read is a really, really bad thing to do, and less confident on, let's say, there's going to be a recession in 2 years because of the tariffs. There's a confidence level based on the knowledge that we currently have.
Yes, you can speak in terms of confidence, or you can just say it's the best idea I have at the moment, regardless of how confident I feel. Like, for example, here's why I don't use confidence. I'm in fact not confident that Einstein's theory of general relativity, the best theory of gravity we have at the moment, I'm not confident that it's true. I'm not confident in it. But what I would say, it's the only thing that I've got. I don't have any alternatives. So my feelings on the matter, and anyone's feelings on the matter, confidence or otherwise, make no difference to the validity of the argument that we are presented with. And so, yeah, you can. I think it can be a useful shorthand, but I think it's almost like it's just misdirected kind of thing. It puts people in a psychological frame of mind when it comes to epistemological claims, when no such psychological frame of mind was ever needed. You can just talk about reasons for and against, good explanations, bad explanations. But I'm not going to be dogmatic if people want to use the word confidence, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's more a practicality to use these confidence levels, and it's also a way for the interviewer to assess how to ask the questions. Like if someone says, "I'm 100% confident. In fact, I'm certain. I don't believe. I know." And you would ask your questions differently than someone says, "Hey, I kind of agree with this, but my mind can be changed. I got no skin in this game. I really don't care about it that much. Sure, okay, that sounds good to me. Yeah, I changed my mind."
Yep,
you can right away pick up on that just by asking these confidence questions.
Yeah, and just by talking about confidence, I mean, in my view, it's not for me, right? The conversation isn't for me, it's for my interlocutor. I'm trying to help them reason through things and also trying to maybe teach them some things about the way they think and where that may be flawed. So if they're saying 100%, that's something I'm going to jump into. It's like, well, what keeps you at 100%? What does that mean? Does that mean you cannot be wrong? Is there space for learning? Are they doxastically open? And that's, the confidence level they give me is a clue to that.
Yeah. I just have a hobby horse and I get pedantic. So in the situation that you present there, you talk about 100%. 100%, I'm 100% sure in this thing implies to me that they also think there's a possibility they could be 99% sure or 90% sure, 80% sure and so on. And at that point I would immediately go down, because it's my hobby horse, I would immediately go down the road of, well, how do you know that you're 90% sure? Some people might very well say that. What calculation have you done to reach that number? Now, of course, they will say, and many people will object at this point and say, well, they don't strictly mean 90%. They don't really mean 100%. They haven't done a calculation. It's just a number assigned to a general feeling, in which case I say, well, then why bother even saying the number if you know that the number is irrelevant? You can just say, there's no possibility of me being wrong about this, which is true, and that's like it's true, a description of their psychological state without assigning the number. I think they're wrong about claiming they could not possibly be wrong, and we should always say that we could possibly be wrong about this, even if you can't imagine a way in which you're wrong. I always say that's just a failure of your imagination if you can't imagine a way in which you could be wrong. But that argument against the 100% works for every other possible percent that you could assign to people. And this is, again, the reason why I disagree with the Bayesians on this, because the Bayesians make the stronger claim. They really do think that you can assign numbers, and they really do think you do calculations. And in certain areas of science, even in physics, for example, in my own area, they do actually assign numbers to particular theories, saying that this theory is 75% likely to be true or contains 75% truth, things like this. And they do these fancy mathematical calculations, but in the end, the fancy mathematical calculations are all based upon this false epistemology of accumulating evidence. But as I like to say, the day before, I forget what the date was, but the year was 1919, Arthur Eddington performed this experiment where he watched the eclipse of the moon and he measured the angles by which starlight was bent. And this was the crucial test, the experiment, which refuted Newton's theory of gravity. Now, at that point, at that moment onwards, it was the rational thing to do to endorse the general theory of relativity. Now, it took the scientific community a little bit of time to actually all come on board with that, and obviously the experiment was checked and so on. This is the ideal version of this, but my more strong point is, up until that point, all the evidence that had accumulated in favour of, so-called accumulated in favour of or in support of Newton's theory, was completely undone at that point. So in what sense can accumulation of evidence work? In what sense can confidence work? Because if confidence is somehow a measure of the evidence that you've accumulated, if a single observation, if a single piece of evidence can refute all of that, then Reid was talking about the scales before. You've got this whole big accumulated evidence and then there's one piece of evidence over here. It should be that the accumulated evidence on this thing is the thing that wins out. But in fact, that's not what goes on in science. One piece of evidence, this little sliver of evidence, can actually destroy a long-standing theory. And that works not only in science, I think that works in every area that we're thinking rationally about these things. But like I say, I'm not dogmatically opposed. I personally wouldn't do it, but dogmatically opposed to people who talk in terms of confidence, belief, whatever, because you're doing God's work in trying to get people to explain their positions.
Yeah, useful approximations are useful, 99.999, how many times repeating of the time. It's like, I don't think any of us in this room, or probably nobody that we know, would ever come up with a use case where Newton is not sufficient, right?
Right.
Unless there's some quantum physicists in the room and I'm not aware.
Aside from the fact that your iPhone right now, if you're using Google Maps later on today at some point, that's GPS. You will be using general relativity.
Yeah, but for anything that I need to do, like pretty much all I use gravity for is to sit here, and then during a street epistemology conversation to hold up a pen as an illustration and say, can you predict what will happen when I drop this, right?
Yeah. Just apropos of nothing, I'm a Ricky Gervais. He has this offside of Carl Pilkington, and Carl Pilkington said to Ricky, who discovered gravity? And Ricky said, well, Isaac Newton was the first person to discover gravity. And Carl Pilkington said, well, what was the point of that? It's not like we were floating around beforehand, was it?
Yeah.
When you said earlier, the subject matter and the knowledge of.
When you said earlier that there was that one experiment that completely destroyed and discarded Newton's theory of gravity, I'm like, well, that's a pretty dramatic way to say it. But I fully get what you're saying, but yeah, in terms of the utility, whereas, like, for example, I had my first 2 street epistemology talks with flat earthers last week. Can't believe it's taken this long, but, and they're basically saying, oh, we need to throw out gravity, or the fact that Newton's theory of gravity is not 100% true means gravity does not exist and therefore the earth is flat. Right. So there is the danger of people saying, oh, if this thing is not 100% true, if there's anything in science that gets revised, that means it was never true and we can discard the whole thing.
Yeah, so they've got a kernel of truth there. I mean, none of our theories are true in some final sense. They contain truth, and there are better and worse theories. So yeah, like when I say, again, the language was too strong that I used, it completely destroyed Newton's. What I mean is destroyed it as being the best explanation. So we've got competing good explanations. But yeah, I can't understand why a flat earth would say gravity doesn't exist. Like, you might very well say that Newton is wrong or Einstein is wrong or whatever, but I mean, how do you explain things are on the ground, that there is some sort of...
They just use a different word, that's all.
Yeah,
okay, so they're not really...
They refer to density and buoyancy, not realizing that gravity is required to make that. Just stay out of it and don't try to go into that rabbit hole unless you really want to break your brain.
Yeah, right.
Nick, I
It's
talked to some
remarkable.
flat earthers the other day as well,
Yeah.
and but I
Nice.
took a completely different track. I
Mm.
asked them, "Yeah, I believe the Earth is a spherical shape. What does it matter if it's flat or not?" That's the
Yeah.
tact I took, and they could not answer that. They
Oh,
like,
interesting.
yeah.
Because
So
the thing,
basically, I said
yeah,
I pretended I was like a Christian, and I basically said
yeah,
it gives me comfort to believe that the Earth is spherical. Why do you want to
right.
take that away from me? Like, what is it going to prevent me from going grocery shopping or taking care of my kids? Like, who cares if there's like, let's say you're right, let's say there's flat, who cares? And they could
Here's
not give me a good explanation why I ought to believe that there's this flat, other than you should believe what's true for truth's sake. That's the
well,
only thing they could say.
that's the physics-minded flat earther, but the Christian-minded flat earther says that it's if the Earth is this tiny little thing and we're insignificant and we're hurtling through this infinite space, that means
Yeah,
we're insignificant because God didn't make it for us. The
right.
person I was talking with a couple of days ago believes that we're in this terrarium and the universe was created specifically for humans. So there's a whole bunch of flat earth philosophy, which is around we're special. And we know the earth is flat and was created for us by God because we're special.
And my explanation, and you guys can critique me on this, for most epistemology is outside of hard sciences. It's
Mm.
based in psychology. It's based on need. It's based
Yeah.
on dopamine hits. And so if in politics, for example, if you are a woman who's been abused and has no money, you're going to vote Democrat. If you're a business person who was raised on a farm and has valued personal responsibility for your life and kind of say you can do this too, you're going to vote Republican. And whether there's truth in the matter of what's the right political party, I think is bunk. I think it's based on these psychological, this is what has happened to me. And this is what I have an affinity to. It's like electrons attracted to protons. It's just like,
Well, I would say it's more, yes, and it's about my tribe. This is what my tribe.
right. But the tribe all has those same reasons as well, in my opinion. It's what do you value? What do you prefer?
But people don't vote in accordance with their values, right? They like the fact that so many committed Christians voted for the current administration and like
No,
the
no,
current
they
administration
do.
doesn't espouse
It's just
Christian
not the value
values.
you think it is. You think the value is
Possibly.
something
Sure.
like love your neighbor, but their value is maybe something like personal responsibility, that private charity works better than government handouts, that sort of thing.
Mm. Sure. Yeah.
I think it matters most what ideas you take seriously and which environment you grow up in is going to produce certain ideas that have, various sociological, you know, tyings to where people will see people of certain groups as having status because they, value certain things. It's good to be a good Christian if you are, devout. All of this is wrapped up in values and ideas, and all of this can be analyzed on those terms. Genes can produce, certain feelings within us, and then those can be rationalized with ideas, and all of this can be analyzed rationally. So we're ultimately the users of cosmic forces, not victims of it. So
But what's interesting, Reed, is that like I truly believe that if I were to inject people with a high amount of testosterone the day before, or maybe a few months before election time, I could change the vote. I could change the outcome of election through estrogen and testosterone. So, which is really scary
Wow.
because this whole
That's
idea of, which is, well, if you look at polling data all around the world, like leaning left, leaning right means different things in different countries. But basically, there's a divide between men and women in how they think and how they vote and what they value and so forth, justice versus mercy and that sort of thing. And you can actually impact this whole idea of epistemology by which drugs you inject.
things can bias us, yes, but we're never determined to go, inevitably to be a certain way.
It can't be that genetically we're programmed to vote in one of two ways, and this can be falsified simply by virtue of the fact that as people learn more, they tend to change their political persuasion. Not all the time, but you only need a few instances to refute the general theory. So if you're born with the genes to vote Democrat, for example, or Republican, then explain the people who, throughout their university career, vote in one direction, and then sometime later in life, vote in a completely different direction. And we've seen that just in, of course, the last election. People are going all over the place, and environment, genetics. But I think that the fundamental thing is what you know, whether that's true or not. But what you've learned over time will.
See, I disagree with that. See, I'm a Republican, and I could probably defend the Democratic policies better than most Democrats. I know what they believe and why they believe it. I know it, and I still vote Republican.
I mean, when I did a bunch of political related SE chats in the run up to the last election, I found that the Republicans that I interviewed, while I disagreed with them, they had reasons for their political beliefs, whereas the Democrats had feelings behind their political beliefs, and they didn't really have any epistemology.
Republicans have feelings too. It's just on different things.
Yeah,
and I think the Republicans, and this is the male versus female divide as well. So it's males tend to value ideas like justice, that it's okay to kill the pedophile, whereas if you're female, you're more likely, not guaranteed, to say, well, they can be rehabilitated. Don't kill them. That sort of thing. And I think you'll see this all throughout the world, these differences.
All very interesting. Folks, I think I need to jump out and continue with my day, but this has been an interesting chat. Thank you much.
See you, Nick. Nice
Good to
meeting
meet you, Nick.
You too.
Maybe now that I'm in this hour, I have to pay for this little office space by the hour. I've got some time to potentially review this classic SE interview that Anthony did with this student on some campus here in San Antonio. And I want you to just stop me and think, like, if you see any potential errors in the epistemology Anthony held to ask a certain question, because this is pretty much how classic SE has been done. He gets into explanations, he gets into this example, but it's just, could critical rationalism make for a better SE conversation, more rigorous epistemology? How would that look?
This is good, because I'm still not clear of the difference, other than a few difference in words, like terminology. But in practicality, I still don't know the difference between the two methods. So this will be a great thing to go through.
Yeah, and I'll try to jump in with the potential other questions I would now ask differently from what Anthony does. So here we go.
That spirits can come back and are with us, whether it's doesn't mean I practice it or anything, but I believe it's a big possibility.
You think it's possible that spirits can come back to us after a human dies?
Yes.
Okay. And you said something like, I
don't actively do a whole trying to talk to them, but I believe they're there.
You have a view that when humans die,
They stay
it's
with us.
possible that it can happen, or it's actually happening?
It's that they stay with us. My grandma, she raised me with the belief of how once you die, you have to leave a cup of water out because our spirits are still with us. They stay with us for a good amount of time before they go wherever they need to go. So you keep a cup of water nearby, so that in case they get thirsty on their travels, they can drink that.
Okay. What I've heard so far is the claim that basically ghosts exist, and the reason why is because her grandmother raised her that way, to think that once someone dies, you should leave water out for them So that, I guess if they're a thirsty ghost or something, they want to, before they go on. Yeah.
There's an appeal to what possibly might be the case as well. It says it's possible that this could obtain, so therefore I believe that this is the case as well. But an infinite number of things could be possible. Surely if you're in a frame of mind where you say you believe something, it should be because you have a good explanation of that thing, not because it's merely possible. Any number of things could be possible. The other side of the planet right now could have been extinguished by a nuclear explosion and we don't know about it yet. But that's no reason to think that it's the case. And I probably would be bad personally at doing street epistemology, because I would end up going down the road of science and just say, okay, you've said that it's possible. I want to tell you that it's impossible, because what energy source is this spirit actually using? I'd want to go down that road. It seems to violate the laws of thermodynamics, and but yeah.
But Brett, if you say to this young lady that it's impossible, what do you think she's going to think about you and feel about you? And
well, I would probably put it very gently. I would say something in terms, if I was actually seriously going to have a conversation with somebody like this, I'd say, how strongly are you committed to this idea that spirits exist? And it seems like she's not particularly.
You mean
strongly,
confidence level?
well, she doesn't seem to have good reasons at all. Like I say, it's just, this is a possible thing that she thinks could be the case. And I say, would it hurt you to understand that in fact it's not possible, and then explore that,
Okay, this is the way I would do it. And I sincerely forget. I've seen this, like this, how old is this? 5, 10 years?
Yeah.
But I don't remember it. But my question to her would be, my grandmother taught me that souls don't stay with us. In fact, they don't even exist. So your grandmother says this, my grandmother says that. How does the person over there, watching and listening to us, how do they decide which grandmother to believe?
Yeah, that's what we call the outsider test.
And then that would get the gears in her brain thinking, oh, well, maybe, my grandmother's right and your grandmother's wrong, but based on what? What's your explanation, or why do you believe that? This is why I think the terminology is different, but we're basically coming at it the same way.
Why does the ghost need to drink water? I don't understand.
They're thirsty.
Where does it go? Again, thermodynamics. The matter just disappears.
But if you get into that details, like if you were to ask questions like, do ghosts have stomachs? Like, do they dehydrate? Like, that will just throw everything off path to her core explanation or belief for this is grandma.
She might try an ad hoc. If sophisticated enough thinking could get you there, she could fall back on, for example, if I was her, well, ghosts are actually made of a kind of gas, and the water can evaporate and keep the gas going.
Let's see what Anthony does here.
I bet you.
Your grandma advises leaving out a cup of water for spirits, because after people pass, they don't necessarily go away right away.
Go right immediately.
And what's the purpose of the water?
In case they get thirsty in their travels, they can drink water.
If they get thirsty during their travels. Okay, so hearkening back to our discussion about truth, if you were to come to the realization that you don't have a good reason for thinking that this is true, painful as it might be, would you be willing to abandon your view or significantly lower your confidence in it?
I think if someone proved to me and came and told me that it's not true, I would believe less in it and would practice it less. I wouldn't practice it.
Well, let's get a
Yeah, so her standard was, that sounds like an evidentiary standard. Prove to me.
It's a very high bar to prove that it's not the case. Again, this is why focusing on explanations is so good, because you don't have to have something disproved or proved to you. It's just, do you have any sort of account of the world? And if all you've got is, this could possibly be the case, and I was taught this on mother's knee by my grandmother, I mean, that for any other claim in the world, but we could say to her, well, surely your grandmother and your mother taught you about Santa Claus as well, that you believed in Santa Claus for a while, at some point you realized it wasn't true. It's possible in some abstract sense that Santa Claus exists, but
did you guys notice what
she's...
Do you notice what she said there? She said, even if it were proved to her to be false, she would practice it less. In other words, she's saying that she would still practice it even if it was false. So she's giving Anthony a taste that she doesn't value truth as much as maybe Anthony wants or is expecting. She's saying, I'm okay with practicing things that are false or believing things that are false. She's basically admitted that here.
Anthony had a previous conversation with her, a couple, like I think maybe a week before this, about the value of truth. That's another great conversation. So maybe she's still, like, yeah, at this point, still lingering on about
And
that.
there's value to her in practicing something that she knows to be false, which is very, and I think this is rife in humanity, that there is value in believing false things sometimes. Placebos is a classic example.
Yeah, it's fine to use Newton's gravity, even though you know it's false, to do that. You just don't delude yourself. Don't fool yourself into thinking reality is a certain way when you do things.
Yeah, using something, the practical benefits of something, all of that stuff is independent of whether or not something is true.
All right, let's see where this goes.
Sense of how sure you are that this really is true.
I think.
Have you watched any of my videos since we talked?
No, I have not.
Okay. I like to propose a scale of confidence in the claim that it's factually true. 0 to 100, and 100 would be, there's no question in my mind, there's no doubt. I have 100% confidence that it's real and true. And then 0 would be, all I have is questions, all I have is doubt. I don't think that it's true.
I would be like a good 90.
Okay.
A 90.
You have a 90% confidence that spirits
Yes.
come back to us after people die. And in order for you to move, correct me if this isn't what you're saying, but you were talking about, it would need to be proved to me that it's not true in order for me to budge off of my current level of confidence. Okay. It sounds like you would require evidence to move you down. Did you use evidence to move you up?
Not scientifically based evidence, but
What do you think of that question? Because Anthony's appealing to this potential rational standard that if we should balance it. If we have a belief and we should have evidence to get us to the belief, then the same quantity, potentially, and quality of evidence should move us down.
Yeah, and this might help Doug with where I'm coming from as well. As soon as we ask her to place herself on this scale, 0 to 100, we've made a misstep, because now we're trapped in talking about evidence and confidence when both of those things are irrelevant to the quality of the explanation that's being given. David Deutsch would say, I can almost guarantee, that when someone says they're at 90, he would say, why not 89? Why not 91? Now, of
But
course,
that's
that seems
silly, though, in my opinion.
But it's not silly, because if you're not willing to take seriously the idea that 89 is different to 90 to 91, then on what basis are you saying the scale exists at all? Why have 0 to 100? Why not have 0 to 5? Or you could pick any scale that you like, but any of those scales are just an internal attempt to assess your own emotional strength.
Right. That's the whole point.
And you can be completely wrong about that. It doesn't matter how strongly you feel about something, your reasons can still be defunct. They can still be completely wrong. Lots of people, and this is a perfect case in point, what we want to elicit, I would say, from the girl is, why does she believe this thing? Now, we've already had that account. We want to assess the reasons why she would be convinced by, her grandmother that any of these beliefs about spirits actually contradict other things that she knows about reality, about the fact that, well, none of her other friends ever talk to spirits. She's possibly never talked to these spirits. It's just a thing that apparently she has some feeling about. But now, as I say, we're sort of trapped in discussing with her the evidence, which is irrelevant because there is none, and the strength of her feeling, which again is irrelevant. I want to know what the explanation she has, whether
Her
she's
explanation
strongly
is her
committed to.
grandmother. She's already stated that, but maybe she'll say something more. But the reason why Anthony asked that question is because if she would have said 100, then he would ask a different type of question. If she would have said 40, then he would have asked a different type of question. That number is just a rough gauge of what the next question is going to be. So, for example, if she would have said, how confident are you that spirits exist? And she says 100%. And then he could have, knowing Anthony, he would ask if someone was 100% confident that spirits don't exist, like Brett. What would you ask Brett? Like, would you just give up on him? Well, I would say to Brett, like, why are you so dogmatically mind closed? Like, why aren't you open to this idea of spirits existing if you say you're 100?
I would never put myself on such a scale. I would never say
I know,
I'm 100%
I'm just giving a
confident. But yeah. So that's why I would say the question really to her is, for someone who says that there is no reason to posit the existence of this spirit, like what problem in your life or in anyone's life does this spirit solution solve? Like, what's it doing?
Anxiety, depression. That's, and maybe Anthony gets into that. It gives me comfort to know that my ancestors are with me.
It gives children excitement and comfort to know that Santa Claus, to believe in Santa Claus as well. But
and many parents allow their kids to believe in Santa Claus till age 12 or whatever. Because
so that's
of
maybe
that
where
reason.
I'd go with this girl, is just to compare things that she knows are false, but rest upon exactly the same argument she's using to demonstrate that this thing is true or possibly true or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that's where Anthony's going to go with this.
I think that's where some of it goes. Let's see.
Personal, like personal experience as to what I've seen and also what I have seen others witness.
You've had a personal experience, and then you've also heard reports of other people who have had personal experiences?
Yes, like with when my uncle passed away. Well, before he passed away, he was sick, and he kept talking about how he kept seeing my grandpa. My grandpa had already passed away for years, and he kept saying how he saw my grandpa. My grandpa was with us. So he was talking about it and how my grandpa was calling him, and for the time that he saw my grandpa, like, he was feeling better, and then like a few days later he died. And then with me, I kept hearing, like, in my house, my grandpa died in my mom's room. So now my mom's room won't stay locked sometimes. Like, the door, we'll lock it, and at middle of the night we'll hear the footsteps and the door opens.
Huh.
And then sometimes we can hear my grandpa, like, calling up to us. So we leave a cup of water by his picture.
Interesting. Did this stuff start happening within, like, immediately after he passed away? Does it still continue to this day?
Yes, sometimes. We can hear, like,
By the way,
footsteps.
Reed, what she's describing right now, I think happens in it's like 17% of people who've lost loved ones, which is shockingly high. Don't quote me on the number, but it's I think low double-digit percentage of people actually hearing voices and seeing their dead loved ones. And so this type of explanation / evidence is not to just be brushed away. This is a real phenomenon that happens in the brains of Homo sapiens.
Yeah, these are things now to explain or to attempt to explain with ideally competing explanations. And
Yeah, but I think the mistake a lot of people would make is say, "Oh, that's rubbish." I mean, that could have been anything. It could have been the dog walking, and you thought it was your dad. Or, I think, and I'm bad at this, but I think you have to acknowledge, yeah, I've actually heard this from other people as well. This is a real thing. I'm not disparaging this type of experience and personal anecdote.
Yeah, that's where we would say, or I'd invoke Popper's idea that all evidence is theory laden. I also share your theory that, in fact, some people really do see the thing. They really do see the person. They really do hear the voice. Now, of course, it's all happening in here. It's not out there, would be the best explanation. But nonetheless, this is why when you see something, people say, seeing is believing. Oh, no, it's not. Seeing is not believing, because seeing is a very complicated process that the eyes, and in fact, sometimes not even eyes, but the brains go through. Yeah.
Well, let's see what else he does.
Okay. I'm wondering if somebody who wasn't even aware that this was a possibility had loved ones that they knew very well pass away, and they had no idea. It didn't even cross their minds that there might be spirits, or that they should be leaving out water for them. And they started experiencing these same things. A locked door, finding its way open, hearing what sounds like footsteps in the middle of the night or something, or maybe during the day. I don't know what time of day we're talking about here. But they're experiencing the same things that you are experiencing. There's no doubt in my mind that you're experiencing something. If they were to experience the same thing, and yet they weren't aware of this concept of spirits, how do you think that they would respond to it? What do you think might go through their mind?
But maybe sometimes faulty with the door, or that, or maybe that they're sleep deprived or still sleeping, I think.
Maybe there's a problem with the door. Maybe they're sleep deprived.
Yeah, or like they're just tired and they think they're hearing things.
Tired.
This is excellent.
Okay. I think what we're saying is that if somebody wasn't even aware of spirits, or didn't even have this concept in their mind, if these things were to happen to them, they would possibly think of explanations for them other than spirits. Okay. If you weren't exposed to the idea of spirits, do you think that you would be coming to the similar conclusions that they might, or something else?
I'm not really sure, because I've always grown up with the subject of spirits, like respecting them.
Mm-hmm.
But possibly, I don't know. I feel like it would depend as to like who I associated myself with if I didn't, because I know like a lot of my friends, some of my friends believe in it. And then I have some that don't, and they just say you're superstitious.
Okay. You know people who believe in it and people who don't. Okay. Do you think that what you're designating as evidence warrants being 90% confident that it's real and true?
That question I would probably never ask again, because they were just talking about explanations, and now he's asking, does your evidence warrant 90%? This is how I used to think of it, how evidence should play a role in how much confidence we should have. At this point, I would definitely trying to make it explicit. We're talking about potential different explanations for various things that happened.
Because if the evidence includes things like she locked the door and then later on the door is unlocked, if she keeps on repeatedly noticing this strange phenomenon, then on that account, then the more evidence that she has, the more confident she should become that in fact her own idea is true. But that's not the way evidence works. In fact, every time she sees the door unlocked after she locked it, what she has in fact is a problem. She doesn't know why, but she's leaping at one particular thing. So no accumulation of evidence should change her mind on this. She really should be asking questions. The critical thinker would, in any of these mysterious cases that she's all saying are triangulating and pointing towards the spirits, are in fact individual problems, which may all have the single solution or may be completely independent.
Yeah, a problem in the Popperian sense, and Deutsch says it's a conflict of ideas. Like, this thing definitely happened, that's one idea, and this thing could not have happened. Now there's a conflict between these two ideas, and that's where you should start to think about things.
Yeah. You've got two ideas happening in your mind and they conflict with each other. So in the case of the door, I have the idea that I locked the door, and then later on the door is open and I can think of no possible way in which the door came unlocked. So this is a problem because these two things can't simultaneously be true. Both I locked the door and now the door is unlocked. So what happened? Well, there must be a good explanation to be found at the heart of that. And what we should not do is leap to, it's the spirit that did it.
Mm-hmm. Reed, tell me again which question you would not have asked and what you would have asked instead.
Well, what Anthony just asked here.
Do you think that what you're designating as evidence warrants being 90% confident?
Warrants being 90% confident. Yeah, it's focused on confidence calibration rather than the quality of an explanation. Does it account for the problems you're trying to solve?
Now, would you say the same thing if it was a MIT student in physics, that would be a poor question? So replace her with an MIT graduate physicist student.
Yeah, it's the same.
Still a bad question?
Yeah.
Because I would say it's a bad question because of who he's speaking to. You got to know your audience. Like just that, the term warrant, I would never use. Like that's a philosophical type term that's not used in everyday language. Mm-hmm. And then now you're applying this weird word to a number and then throwing in the word evidence. I think it's bad for that reason. But if you have like a philosophy student or a hard science doctoral student, I think it's maybe okay.
I don't know what you think about this, but I would think it's an even worse question in that case, because I would expect from the natural science student, the physicist, whatever, to be exceedingly more precise with language and to understand the meaning of numbers, and so would already have, I would hope, a critical opinion about assigning a number like 90% to their mere feelings. I would want to hope that they would come to me and say, I either, again, I know this thing, I don't know this thing, I've got a good explanation, a bad explanation, they wouldn't want to assign the...
True, I hear your point, but in that case, Anthony probably would have shifted something like very confident, somewhat confident, not confident. Don't put a number on it then if they push back.
Yeah, just keep going.
That it's real and true?
I didn't understand that question.
Yeah, she didn't understand.
No, I didn't understand. I didn't like.
Yeah, I'm going to repeat it back. Do you think that the reasons that you're offering for the explanation that you're coming up with warrant being 90% sure that it's spirits?
What do you think of that?
Yeah.
It's better. I would still get rid of the 90%. Do you think the reasons offered for your explanation are any good? No.
Like the explanation against it, like.
I guess what I'm,
because now she's trying to think, are the reasons good enough to warrant the 90% confidence rather than the quality of the explanation? It's the distraction from analyzing.
Yeah, I agree. She's really confused right now, I think, because the way Anthony phrased reasons and explanations, and evidence, because the evidence is a reason and an explanation all in the same time. So she's just confused. So I see what you're saying, Reed.
Yeah. Now that I'm getting more familiar with this, I think the way I'd approach this, if I was to ever do it myself, would be, okay, so she's talked about the spirits, but the thing I'd be focusing in on is the evidence that she's talking about. Okay, the unlocked door. Let's just focus on that for a moment. Okay, and talk to her, whatever her name is. What are the possible reasons that the door could have become unlocked?
But Anthony already did that.
Right, okay. So she should come up with a whole bunch. Now, why are you picking this one and ruling out, what is your method for ruling out the others is the key point, and how could we rule it out? Yeah.
And this is the outsider test for faith. Like if, and Anthony did an amazing job earlier when he said someone who knows nothing about spirits, what would their explanation be? She's now forced to start thinking about other possible explanations.
I think here's where we're at. We recognize that there might be people who were told about spirits, like yourself, and people that aren't told about spirits. And that if they were to each experience similar things, doors opening when they should be closed or locked, the sound of footsteps, and if we look at the conclusions that they're coming to, And we're noticing that some are concluding that it's spirits and some are chalking it up to other explanations. If we recognize that people are coming up with possible solutions or explanations to it based on what they think might be the case or not think is the case, do you think 90% confidence that spirits exist is justified?
That's better.
I think it seems justified to me, like, because I believe it's true.
Her level of confidence is justified, or the quality of her explanation is justified to explain
Neither.
the
I think what
problems?
she's saying here is the it is that spirits exist.
Okay.
But if they're going to prove to me and show me, like, give me the evidence, then yes, that seems like a whole completely thing, and my faith in it might change. If they actually show me, oh, like, hey, like, the door is unleveled and thus causing it to open or something like that. Or maybe when the trees hit it or something. Like, if they give me, like, the actual, they show me why it does it. Like, if they prove to me, then yes, it might falter my belief.
Yes, right. You will move down on your confidence that spirits are real if it can be demonstrated to you, there's some sort of evidence to back it up.
Yes.
Is the sound of footsteps or the opening of a door evidence for spirits? Or is it a claim that you're using to conclude that spirits are real?
What do you think of that question?
That's a bad question.
Do that one more time. Yeah.
It sounds like they're not mutually exclusive.
Real.
Yeah.
Is the sound of footsteps or the opening of a door evidence for spirits? Or is it a claim that you're using to conclude that spirits are real?
Shoot.
Both is what I would answer if I was her.
Yeah, this is the whole problem with the evidence for thing as well. In this case, the evidence, the footsteps or the opening of the door, is not evidence for anything. It's just a problem. You can say it's evidence, but we need an explanation of the evidence. So for someone who's already decided on a particular theory, they're just going to say it's evidence for my theory rather than saying, I don't know. But again, also goes back to what I was saying, that some people are exceedingly uncomfortable. I think there's a lot of psychological things going on here. She's obviously uncomfortable with uncertainty. She wouldn't want to say, I don't know. But also, people who have lost loved ones, who, believe in God, they want something to grab hold on to. And so I think that, in this case, it can be very hard to move her, even if you could show her or even if someone explained to her. At the moment, she might be pretending that she's being rational, that if you could show me that the door was open for other reasons or the footsteps for other reasons, she might accept those reasons, but she'll still be committed to belief in spirits. It's independent. It's a deep emotional need. I mentioned to you, I was listening to Sam Harris yesterday. He was talking about stuff, and he's going to talk to Jordan Peterson again, and talking about how Sam was saying, well, I've taken LSD, massive dose of LSD. Apparently Jordan Peterson has as well. Now, Jordan Peterson says that when he takes lots of LSD, it proves to him that God exists, that Jesus exists. He interprets it all in that. So that to him is evidence from within. He's seeing things, but of course Sam has the same kind of experiences, but it's a completely different interpretation of those sensations and the visions that you see and all that sort of stuff. So it's a special case of this. So even if someone ostensibly as intelligent as Jordan Peterson is going to interpret a whole bunch of things that he calls evidence as an indication that Jesus is the one true savior of humanity. Well, what could you do to possibly refute that? I mean, every time he takes LSD, that's just another confirmation.
I want to make the point that her default position is spirits are real unless proven otherwise, whereas guys like us, the default position is spirits don't exist until proved otherwise. And so we have different default positions on various topics in our lives. And so that standard is different for humans, and that's just based on how we're raised, what we're taught, and so forth. But I guess the question, like Brett, if I were to put you on the hot seat and say, what would it take for you to believe spirits exist in this case, like the footsteps? What would it would take for you to say, I'm convinced spirits exist?
I'd need a good explanation of what a spirit is, what problem is the spirit solving. So if it's just the footsteps and I'm seeing that, let's say right now I start to hear footsteps, but I cannot see a person there. My immediate reaction, apart from going, wow, amazing, would be any number of things from excellent magician, nice prank, hallucination. I'd go through 10 different things before
Let's say we eliminated all those.
Let's say we eliminated all of them. I would then say, I don't know what the hell is going on, but spirit is a positive explanation of something. I would need to know a whole bunch of things about spirits like that, because that's a substantive theory, right? You've got some serious explaining to do to say that there are these entities that wander around in defiance of the laws of physics, seemingly because they've got an energy source that we can't, detect and whatever and so on and so forth. So what would it take? It would take a good explanation of what spirits are that explain the evidence.
Demonstration?
Well,
Like,
again,
forget about explanation. Let's say you saw it with your own eyes and other people and infrared cameras, audio devices. Let's say this girl was with you in a room and called upon her grandpa to take a glass and fill it up with water. So there's a pitcher of water in a glass, and you got infrared, you got magicians there trying to prove that this is not a trick, or is a trick, whatever. And it happens. You see the pitcher just float and fill up the.
I still have to rule out the super sophisticated magician. I don't know what crucial test you could possibly do to distinguish between these two. I'm being pranked right now with the most sophisticated prank
You got
that's
the
ever been
best
done.
magicians in the world saying this is not a trick. We've
That could be part of the
investigated.
prank. That could be. Why am I trusting them? You're holding up. This is the only possible explanation is spirit, but I can't. There's no way it can ever be the only possible explanation. There's no way I can rule out everything else. There's always going to be other things I could invent.
So what I'm hearing is you would never ever have a positive belief in spirits.
No, I would if it was a good. You'd have, because that's not the explanation. I want to know what a spirit is.
Let's say a spirit is something. I understand, and I get this. I say the same thing to Christians and other theists I talk to.
Yep.
But let's say they just say it's something not material, and just leave it at that.
Yeah, good. That's great. So this is where the interesting conversation starts. So you said it's not material, but simultaneously it's able to interact with the material world.
Right.
It can pick up the pitcher of water. So as a physicist, I automatically want to go, okay, so what kind of force, physical force? Is it gravity? Is it electromagnetism? What is it that is able to go from this spirit thing, this nebulous, immaterial thing, and actually able to have a force on this pitcher of water?
Why would you need the mechanism of how it does it to believe?
Because true theories need to reconcile. It can't go against what we know about physics. Because if we invoke a new concept, it can't contradict something as fundamental as our best.
Right, but there was a time, and even in science, where we didn't understand how, but we understood what.
Yes, but this particular theory, okay, if I was to leap to, then the pitcher of water is being levitated by an actual spirit, I'm left with more problems than what I started with. I could sit there and say, I don't know how this thing is working. But if I was to leap to, I know, it's not that I don't know, it's that it must be a spirit. I'm now in a realm where, I've got a heck of a lot of work ahead of me now. Not just answering what this thing is because I'm claiming to know that it's a spirit, but what is the spirit made out of? You say immaterial, but there has to be something else. What is this immaterial thing? How does it interact with the material world if it's immaterial? Again, what energy source is it? Is it immortal? I can keep on enumerating the questions. And in other words, a solution, this is Popper's point, a solution always leads to more problems which are better, which leave you in a better position to go on and answer more interesting questions. But this spirit question, this spirit solution, leads to worse problems. It mucks up what we already know about physics, as Reid said, because But physics says that the only way in which pitchers of water, things made of matter, can actually be moved around is by other bits of matter, because, you know, atoms have forces on certain atoms and they literally resist each other. So, you know, I can't put my hand through my other hand because there's literally a force of repulsion there. But with the spirit idea, we're throwing that out the window. We're saying, no, there are also other things that can move atoms around aside from the physical forces we know. And so we're left with
Just
a
like
whole
general
new
relativity threw out Newtonian on certain things. It just threw it out.
Yeah, and it led to a whole bunch. It led to a whole bunch of solutions. It didn't raise.
Well, this
new
could lead
problems.
to solutions. It could explain why people have these near-death experiences or whatever. Like, I don't believe any of this is true, but what the point I'm making with these questioning is that if you value this thing called truth, and you now raise your bar of standard that I just wouldn't, at best, I'd say I don't know, but I'm not going to have a positive belief, or I know you don't like that word, or inclination that spirits could actually exist, then I don't think you're valuing truth.
Spirits could exist. I've never ruled out the physical possibility that spirit or anything, you know, but it's a very low bar to say that something could exist.
I'm not talking about could. I'm saying that you actually think they do, even though you can't explain all of it. But
That's a contradiction in our worldview. That we have to be able to, in order for us to be able to say that something exists, it has to be connected to an explanation. That's a part of the epistemology.
So what explains if you ruled out all the natural, in quotes, explanations, and you see this pitcher go up and pour at the incantation of dear spirit grandfather, fill this up, and immediately that happens, and you can reproduce it. Let's say you can do it 9 times out of 10 because grandpa sleeps sometimes, and every time you say, grandpa, please fill up the water, it happens. I'm a naturalist. I'm an atheist. I would say my belief scale would go beyond 50% and say there is something here that, sure, we use a word spirit to describe it, but we really don't understand exactly what it is, but it is doing something repeatedly.
Something is doing something repeatedly, something. Now, you're trying to corner me into a position where you say, but you've ruled out everything else and the only thing you're left with is the spirit, because
No, I didn't say the only thing you're left with, but but right now the best explanation is when you say these words and you incite this grandpa or any other person, spirit person, and it happens.
That's not the explanation. That's part of the problem situation. So the problem situation is these words are said, this jug moves, this whole cacophony of events that are occurring constitutes a problem. None of which is explained.
When does a problem become an explanation, and when does an explanation become a problem? Like, I would say, to me, that's an explanation. Now, we don't understand it.
What's the explanation?
The explanation is that a spirit, that's a placeholder for this thing that's doing it. A spirit is lifting the cup and pouring the water.
Why are you saying it's a spirit though?
Yeah, that's a huge theory.
Yeah.
That should have a bunch of.
It's a placeholder word for something we don't fully understand.
Oh, that's okay. You may as well say that's
you don't know.
That's like dark matter.
No,
okay?
but we do know in this hypothetical that it only happens when these certain words are uttered, like grandpa, fill up the glass.
Let's Reed was contacted with a really crucial part of, as he said, the worldview, which is, in our worldview, the idea of existence. What exists? What does it mean for something to exist? And what we tend to say is that something is real or something exists insofar as it appears in a good explanation. So we know stars exist because they appear in our good explanation of what the cosmos contains. So we can talk about how gases come together under gravity and they form these things called stars which fuse and blah, blah, blah. Everything that we know that exists is part of a good explanation. But sometimes we have these words like dark energy or dark matter is the thing. That dark matter is just the label of a problem. But no astronomer is saying they know what this dark matter stuff is. They just have a problem because galaxies rotate too fast, but it's an outstanding problem. So in the same way, if you were to say, I'm going to call
Does dark matter exist?
No one knows. It's the name of a problem. Well, the problem is, the original problem was that, but there's a number of them, but the main one is that galaxies rotate faster than what they should. So people just say,
If Lawrence Krauss was here, I'm sure he would say yes to that.
but he doesn't know what it is. No one, he'd have a Nobel Prize if he knew what it was. All we know is that the galaxies rotate too fast. Now,
But he would say that this thing we call dark matter exists.
But what is it?
That's a different question.
Yeah, he can't say that.
The question is whether it exists or not.
Well, I would disagree with him, and I think most physicists would, that he could even say that, because there is a divide in the physics community. Either this dark matter stuff exists, or the theory of gravity is false, or a third thing that no one's even thought about. So appeals to authority don't much interest me, but that's the situation we're in. We simply don't know, and so we have this label, dark matter, for a situation we can't yet explain. And I would say that's isomorphic with this, the jug gets lifted up, the words are said. You could call it a spirit. You could say, well, I'm going to label this thing spirit. Now, but that doesn't tell us anything about the nature of the spirit, what the spirit is. We're left with all the questions are still ahead of us. And at no point have we ruled out the possibility. We still, again, as I say, we still haven't ruled out the possibility of it being pranked. Now, I don't know how you would rule out the prank. Or anything else that could be going on that is just at the moment unknown to us scientifically, which doesn't include a spirit. Like, for example, here, to be really silly for a moment, what if we really do live in a simulation? And what if the simulation is, the simulator is making a... Now, that would also be an equally ludicrous, I would say, way to jump to. But at the moment, all we have is ludicrous ideas.
Like, what if gravity doesn't exist and that is just a big prank?
Yeah. If you're in a realm of just thinking wild things, you could make up anything. Yeah. But spirit is just one of almost an infinite number of wild claims you could make about why this thing is happening. It's a problem.
All right, let's finish up this little combo.
Oh yeah,
here.
you don't want to go another hour to rant.
I know. Well, now I'm in another hour, so here we go.
I believe it would be evidence because I've experienced it and I haven't been proven wrong.
Default position.
It's a good question. Right, now I'm thinking, I forgot that you do this. Right now, that's gonna be in my head all day.
Uh-oh.
I think it could be so that it's a claim I'm making to support my belief. Because I have no actual, concrete evidence to support it. But at the same time, there's no concrete evidence to go against me.
Yeah.
So I would say it's a claim that I'm claiming it to be to spirits.
You're claiming it to be spirits. Right. So you hear footsteps in the middle of the night or whatever, so whatever time of day. I don't think we've even established when you hear it. What time of day do you usually hear this?
Usually at night.
Okay, at night you hear footsteps, or you hear what sounds like footsteps. Okay. Is that a good characterization, or are you hearing footsteps?
I'm pretty sure they're the footsteps. They sound like how my grandpa used to walk.
Okay.
They sound like his footsteps.
Right. You hear footsteps, or will you be charitable and let me say you hear what sounds like footsteps, or are you hearing footsteps?
Well, that's the whole distinction between, theory-laden observations versus just mere, empirical sense data.
And we should say, she is actually rational. That it's a rational position to say that if she sort of said, no one's disproved it, so she's brought up believing this thing, and no one's ever challenged, apparently no one's ever challenged it. So taken at face value, that's actually a rational position to hold. It was rational for people throughout most of human history to believe in gods because it was the only explanation. It was the best explanation that God did the stuff. Now, once you do have a better explanation, the rational thing to do is to move to the better explanation. But if she's never been given an alternative, then it's quite right for her. And perhaps this is the only time that someone's really challenged her, in which case if she's rational and she appears to be, tending in that direction of changing her mind, then fair enough.
Yep.
I don't want to twist your arm here.
You already have me questioning here. about my evidence.
Here's what I'm wondering about your evidence that you're using to claim with 90% confidence that spirits are real. Could I be raised in a household who thinks that leprechauns are real? All right. And if you wake up in the middle of the night and you actually hear what sounds like footsteps, I'm going to be consistent with my terminology,
Okay.
that you're justified in being 90% confident that those are leprechauns pitter-pattering around the house. Would I be justified in my 90% by calling the sound of footsteps evidence to justify my claim?
Outsider test for faith.
Yeah, that's the outsider test, where we take their reasoning and apply it to something they would probably think is false, and to see if it's consistent. Would they be consistent for the other claim if they're using the same reasoning for basically the same type of claim? He's talking about evidence. But now ideally I would be talking about, which explanation, which reasons are you using to conclude this explanation is better than the other one? And that's definitely possible to apply to an outsider test situation. The point of the outsider test is to help them discover that their reasoning, if it's not good enough to justify that different conclusion, it probably shouldn't be good enough to justify. But now that's in justificationism territory. So you could probably still use it for preferring an explanation over another one. So it's still a tool we could use in that way.
Like, I've used that tool many, many times, and it works. Like, it really does work. Now, the only times it doesn't work is when they say the reasoning works for my situation, but not theirs. But then they're left with this cognitive dissonance that they know that they're being, in essence, a hypocrite. Because if this reason is a good reason, it should apply for both the leprechaun and the spirit. But they say no, it only applies to the spirit.
Yeah,
And then
I think
you just leave them stew in that cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like, I mean, you would have persuaded them, I think. It's just that they're emotionally not ready to admit on camera or to you or to some for some other reason, but they're basically there.
But here's let me tell a story about this young lady. I don't know if this is true. I'm quite sure it's not true. But this lady, because of this interaction with Anthony Magnabosco, left Catholicism, or what I'm assuming she's Roman Catholic, and became an atheist, and got into drugs and became a nihilist, and then killed herself. Now, that's a very macabre, storyline, but it gets to what you said earlier, Brett, about human flourishing. And this is something I've struggled with the last 10 years of my life, is do you, by kind of introducing these concepts to some humans, it can actually make their life worse.
I think if there's nowhere better to leap to, you need to have a better place to go. That's why I say, like, atheism is not a belief system. And so it's not that just giving up on God and all the beliefs and everything is, that's not going to necessarily lead to a better place, but there are better places to go. Yeah, that's why I say that, and this is again part of our worldview, is that it puts people back at the center of the cosmos in a crucial way. Not physically, but it says that what the Christians and all the religions have right is that human life is sacred. What certain kinds of scientific forms of atheism say, like Stephen Hawking, is that we're just a chemical scum, we're not particularly important, there's nothing special about human beings. Scientific rationalism tells us that the earth isn't the center of the universe, it's not the center of anything, people are nothing but another kind of animal. Okay, it's kind of true in a very technical, narrow sense, but what David Deutsch and others add to the picture is, okay, take all that as read in a technical sense. There's something unique about people. The earth is a hub of creation of explanatory knowledge. And over time, looking far ahead, this planet will change the rest of the universe because we'll explain it, we'll create technologies, we'll travel everywhere. Now that, once you appreciate that, that is an inspiring a story as anything you'll get in religion. In fact, more so, because people become like gods. We are able to take control of the planet, control of the universe. Now, even religions didn't say that. Religion said, you know, human life is important, but they could never have imagined that humans could become something like the thing they were worshipping, which is the thing that was able to control the climate. Like, if we're able to actually gain control of the climate of planet Earth using technology, or gain control of the entire solar system and build, you know, huge space stations and stuff like that, well, then we become planet builders as well. And this is more than, you know, this is atheism with a cosmic view, a cosmic place for people.
Transhumanism, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not in a Mormon mystical way. It's an actual realistic way.
But I think we all here know that, like, us three guys sitting here are not like most people. Like, I would posit that most people believe that fantasy will always trump reality.
Well, I think we're always at the beginning of infinity. We're at a very, very early stage of the Enlightenment. I regard the Enlightenment, like David Deutsch, as we're in it. It's continuing. But it only began a couple of centuries ago. Human beings have been around for, and it would depend upon what timescale you look at, 1 million years, 200,000 years, something like that. So for the overwhelming majority of human history, nothing happened, no progress was made. We couldn't imagine what it was possible for humans to do. But now we're at a time where we can imagine what is physically possible for us to do. Anything that's not prohibited by the laws of physics, we could possibly do. If it is not prohibited by the laws of physics of converting all the matter in the solar system into a space station that can travel at near the speed of light anywhere in the universe and continue to make ever more progress, and people can be immortal and be downloaded into silicon brains and so on and so forth, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, that will happen because that might be something that we will choose to do. But we're nowhere near there. So because the Enlightenment is so young, I would expect that the majority of people on planet Earth are still mired in mysticism and faith and bad ideas, and we will always have those people. But I wouldn't be disheartened. I wouldn't say that people are incapable any more than, you know, people were literally incapable of being enlightened scientific thinkers 300 years ago. They were, it's just that the overwhelming majority weren't, because they hadn't learned that what was possible to know. And as time goes on, I expect things to get better, which is why, you know, I'm an optimist about people.
Right, but you know, we're realists here as well, and like I applaud your optimism, but a huge rock could hit our planet 10 years from now, and that's the end of us.
Yeah.
And for
inevitable.
most people, that thought terrifies them. It probably doesn't terrify us, because, you know, we're probably not going to feel any pain, and that's the end of us. But for some people, that terrifies them, that not to exist eternally, and this is why religion exists, and it helps us survive.
It's a piece of that, yeah.
Problems are inevitable. Problems are soluble. So yeah, the rock is coming. I always say that. Like, not only is it possible for the rock to head towards us, it is inevitable that at some point a comet or an asteroid is going to head towards us. Now, the only thing that can stop it from destroying us is for us to divert that comet or that asteroid in some way. And the only thing that's going to allow us to do that is more wealth, more technology, more knowledge about how to do so. And so that again comes back to this worldview about flourishing and about wealth. And it's why we have to have maximal freedom, because in fact, if you care about other animals on this planet, if you care about the planet itself, the only thing that's going to save the other animals, the only thing that's going to save the climate or the planet are the people here. Because we know as a scientific fact, the sun is eventually going to expand and evaporate the oceans and so on and so forth, or the supernova is going to go off, or we're going to be hit by an asteroid, or there's going to be a virus that wipes out all of humanity. So the only thing that's going to mitigate any,
or Yellowstone's going to blow up.
Yep.
That's probably our biggest risk, is Yellowstone. I mean,
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the super volcano is is
That's
a bit of a worry.
ticking
yeah.
time bomb.
There's
I
the
got to
ticking
pee.
time
Like,
bombs, and there's the nuclear bombs as well that we've got to worry about.
This is great. We can wrap it up here. I'm sure we'll have many more great conversations. This is great, Doug. Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of fun, Doug. Thanks.
yep. See you, Brett.
Bye.
And yeah, keep watching.